All right. I'd like to call this meeting to order, Tuesday, March 20th, 2018, regular meeting of the Princeton Board of Education. Welcome to this public meeting of the Princeton Board of Education. The board is an elected, unpaid group of 10 citizens who set policy and make decisions on educational, financial, and personnel matters for the Princeton Public Schools on behalf of all residents. We're always pleased when members of the community attend our meetings. The board and the school district operate under applicable New Jersey laws and under regulations of the New Jersey State Board of Education. Each meeting includes three opportunities for those attending to comment on agenda items and other matters of interest to them. The board reserves the right to limit the time allotted to public participation, and law limits discussion of individual personnel and confidential matters. We hope that our meetings provide useful opportunities for communication between the board and the community, so thank you for attending. And with that, Ms. Kennedy, if you would call the roll.
Patrick Sullivan.
Here.
Betsy Kelber-Baglia.
Here.
Daphne Kendall.
Here.
Beth Barron.
Here.
Debbie Bromfeld.
Here.
Jessica Deutsch.
Here.
Bill Hare.
Here.
Greg Stenkowitz.
Here.
Michelle Tuck-Ponder. Evelyn Spahn.
Here.
Brian Liu.
Here.
Amy Wang.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, and we're going to move on to item D, which is adoption of the minutes. And because we've had many meetings these days, since we're meeting almost all the time, we're going to need separate motions for each one of the minutes. So first, if I can have a motion for the adoption of the minutes of February 27th, 2018. Greg, and a second. Debbie, thank you. Any comments or questions on those minutes? And do we have any abstentions for that? Well, you will know. If so, all in favor of adoption of the minutes? Oh, vote, right?
Yeah, it's voting.
Okay, thank you. And now, motion please for the adoption of the minutes of March 6, 2018. Betsy, and a second. Debbie, any questions or comments? Okay, and now number 3, the adoption of the minutes of the meeting of March 13th, 2018. Greg, and a second. Beth. Any questions or comments there? Okay, and I think tonight, as we did in our last meeting, as I said in my opening remarks, we will have 3 periods for members of the public to comment on matters on the agenda or other matters. But our first public comment session at item E, we'd just like to move slightly back so that we can do the board president's statement and the superintendent's statement, because I think probably a lot of the comments will be about those same issues. So if we put that information out there, it might be more conducive for the discussion. So we'll just push that back, the first public comment period back until those 2 comment periods, if that's okay. So with that, I won't take a lot of time. We have a lot on our agenda tonight and a lot of really interesting and useful information for the public. Steve Cochran always says about budgets that they are a reflection of a community's values. That's particularly true tonight as we go through 2 different budgets that are very much related to our mission of providing the best public education that this community can provide. On the one hand, we are looking tonight at our annual budget and approving a tentative budget. As I mentioned in the last meeting when we were together, that we've always worked every year that as long as I've had personal experience, it's always been tough to put together an annual budget because we have very many competing interests. The interest to take the best possible care of this community's children and to provide the best education in the world, which we do. At the same time, keep the costs within both our statutory parameters and the parameters of what the community can afford, and being mindful that people have to be able to continue to live here, even though we have the best public education that we think you can get. And once again, it was a very difficult challenge this year. We'll talk about it later in the meeting, but as we've met that challenge, we worked very hard to balance those competing interests, and I think we've done that. The second budget that we'll talk about tonight is the referendum budget. We all know that our district is growing and that we have an obligation to provide facilities that meet both our need of housing and taking care of our children, and also that reflect our values of a community that respects education and wants to provide the best education possible. Once again, lots of tough decisions. We've talked with the architects and with the community over the past really 2 years as we've developed all of this out, and listened to many different constituencies, and it's getting close to the time where we have to make some tough decisions about what we can build, what we'd like to build, and what we can afford to build, and make sure that we do that in a way that meets all of the needs of everyone in our community. And again, this is a first effort at that, but I'm really proud of the work that everyone's done. It's been a lot of work, and I think we've done a very thoughtful and prudent job in putting something together there. So that's another exciting piece of news that will be coming up ahead. So again, I'd just like to thank this board for all the work that they've done on both of those budgets. I'd like to especially thank Stephanie Kennedy for the outstanding work that she's done for the past 25 years. You know, we don't 20. But it feels like 25. Yeah.
Before you know it.
We don't point out enough the awards that she wins from, you know, the plaudits she wins from auditors, the awards from organizations that look at business offices and how they operate, and our bond rating agencies, which rate us as one of the highest rated rating grades that there is, and it's because of the work that our business office does and the prudence that we do in our financial and all of our financial dealings. So thank you to this board, thank you to Stephanie Kennedy, and to all the people who worked on this, parents, teachers, administrators, members of the community, on both budgets, really. It's always a bunch of competing needs, and we brought it together really well as a town and as a community. So I want to applaud everyone who worked on that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Steve. So, but thank you all, and I think everyone deserves a big round of applause for all this work. So thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Good evening, everyone. We have a small crowd here today. We thank you for braving the weather. I'm sure we have a much larger group that's watching at home. So just welcome to everyone. I have 4 items that I want to touch on tonight for the superintendent's report. The first is just to remark about the shelter in place that occurred today. So at 10:35 this morning, I got a call from the high school principal who had heard over the police scanner that the police had responded to an individual with a gun at Panera Bread. The high school immediately went into shelter in place. We called all of our other schools to place them in shelter in place. We contacted Larry Patton at the charter school so that they too could go into shelter in place. And then we were in touch with the police throughout the day as they updated us on the situation. And at this point, I just want to thank our staff and our students and our parents for their calm and cooperation as this sort of unusual situation, sad situation unfolded. And I particularly want to acknowledge and thank our police and all of the law enforcement agencies that responded in town. We talk about safety and security. We think that it will never happen in a community like ours, and certainly Main Street of Princeton is not where we expected to have the incident that occurred today, and our thoughts are with those first responders and all those who were affected by the incident. So moving on, Mother Nature clearly missed the memo that today is the first day of spring. The weather alerts kept being updated hourly. I think we started off with a couple of inches yesterday, 3 to 5 this morning, 6 to 9, 7 to 10, 11 to 13, I'm not sure, 13 to 17 is where we are now. So for those of you who did not get the message that went out around 6:30 tonight, school will be closed for tomorrow. And while, you know, we talk somewhat lightheartedly about yet another snow on the first day of spring, this one comes with some seriousness attached to it. It's going to be heavy snow, a lot of snow with some high winds, and the power outages that we just recovered from, there's a danger that those may occur again. So I just am offering my hope that the families, the people listening tonight will stay safe and be prepared for this event. School will be closed tomorrow, and there is a possibility that school will be closed on Thursday, but we will communicate to the community as to the status of school for Thursday and later in the week. And we will also be looking at the calendar and sending a message regarding the makeup days that we know now have to be put in place. So look for that communication to come from us as well. Okay. Turning now to the tentative budget and our referendum. As Pat pointed out, our district is deep into the process of developing both an annual operating budget for next year and a cost for our facilities referendum. And I'm proud of the thought that has gone into both our short and long-term financial vision for this district, and I'm proud to discuss tonight our current thinking about both proposals. In the development of the tentative budget for the 2018-2019 school year, and in the development of preliminary costs for the upcoming referendum, the board has worked to balance its fiscal responsibility to taxpayers with its commitment to the high-quality education for the children we serve. We believe that the tentative budget, while austere and the result of many tough choices, fulfills this balance responsibly. We also believe that the referendum proposal cost-effectively balances our need for space, our need for security, our need to maintain our aging buildings, and our desire to align the learning spaces in our schools to the learning goals we have for our students. The board has developed a tentative budget for the 2018-2019 school year, which calls for a 3.63% increase in the tax levy, resulting in an annual increase of $159 on the average assessed home of $837,174. And you can see that the increase last year was a bit higher than that at $187, almost $188. The increase is mostly as a result of the many fixed costs incurred by the district, including contractual increases in salaries for our staff, increased costs of health benefits, and the annual and increased cost for the charter school. The State Department of Education allowed for the tax levy increase to exceed the 2% cap again this year because of our continuing rise in enrollment. Like every year, but this year in particular, the board had to make some difficult decisions to balance the budget. Currently, there are no new staff positions included in the budget, despite our enrollment that has risen approximately 10% over the past 5 years. Our administrators had asked for more than $900,000 in new staff positions to meet the needs they felt were present in their schools. Those are not in the budget. Moreover, $500,000, $500,000 will be cut from the budget for next year through staff attrition. We were helped in balancing the budget by an increase in state aid, for which we are grateful. That came in at just over $500,000, but our numbers are still very, very tight, probably the tightest budget that I have seen since I've been here. The final total budget of roughly $98 million will be presented in detail at the board meeting on April 24th, following review and approval by the county superintendent. So turning to the cost for the facilities referendum, we will have a presentation shortly by Scott Downey, our lead architect for Spiesel Group, and he will dive in more deeply into the need and the numbers and explain that. But I wanted to take an opportunity to share with the community and with this board the need to go over the numbers and to explain why this project is so important. So the projected cost of the referendum is currently just over $137 million. And although it's important to note that this number is still being refined by our architects, our administrators, and our facilities committee, it's also important to note that more than $24 million of the referendum costs will be funded through construction grants from the state and not by the Princeton taxpayers. The amount of just over $137 million includes the necessary and cost-effective renovations to Princeton High School, John Witherspoon Middle School, and the 4 elementary schools, as well as the cost to create additional needed capacity by building a new 5-6 school. It also includes all associated costs for these projects, including furniture and fixtures, as well as a required contingency for any additional costs that may arise. The new bonds from the referendum will mature over the course of 30 years, beginning in 2020. Because the district's current debt service will retire in 2023, the old and new debt will overlap for a period of 4 years, which means that the additional cost to taxpayers will be higher in the first few years than it will be in the years after the district's current debt has been paid off. So in 2020, the first year, the new bond will impact taxes. The additional cost to the taxpayers for the average assessed home value at $837,000 approximately will be $680 annually. By 2023, when the old debt will be paid off, the additional cost for the average assessed home will have decreased to $319 annually. So you can see that in the chart we have here. There will be a peak in year 2 of $827. It will drop to, I believe, $812, and then down to $319, and then it will continue to drop. If the district takes on no new additional debt from 2023 through when the bonds mature in 2049, the additional cost to taxpayers will continue to decrease, and the average additional cost over the full 30 years of the bond will be about $153. You can see that represented in this graph here. I want to close by just saying that this is, in my mind, a defining moment for our district. We have been called to meet the challenges of growing enrollment and the needs of our aging buildings. Over the past 2 years, the board has worked to create a plan for the referendum that is cost-effective and addresses all of the needed infrastructure improvements for each of our school buildings. We believe this referendum is a wise and responsible investment for our students now and for the future of education in our community. Without this investment, our schools that are already over capacity will be squeezed even tighter. We will see growing class sizes, reduced electives, and may be forced to take other actions that would compromise the educational excellence that is our district's hallmark. Our plan adds the space and safety enhancements that we urgently need in a way that is best for our students and staff and is respectful of the tax burden to our community. I want to thank everyone for their continued support of the Princeton Public Schools, and we look forward to ongoing dialogue with all of the stakeholders in our community as we move this process forward. And with that, I would invite Scott Downey to come and present a little bit more about the referendum. I will close with just this one picture. This is a group of our students at JP Elementary School meeting with the architects. I leave this up here for a moment because I want us to be reminded that this is why we are doing the work. These are the students who will benefit from the changes that we are making, from the creation of a 5-6 school, from the renovations we're doing at all of the schools and particularly the high school. And the time will go by fast. And so let's just hold that in mind as we talk through the changes and we look more carefully at the investment that we're making in our kids and in our facilities. So Scott, take it from there. Yep.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. There we go.
Yep.
So with regard to the referendum, I'm going to walk everybody through kind of the overall plan that's being proposed. There was a fairly substantial presentation a week or so ago on the proposed 5-6 school and the high school. I'm not going to go into that level of depth, but I will hit some of the highlights just to remind people of some of the concepts at work there. And additional information will be provided in future presentations as well as on the website. Specifically, the district faces a range of needs. We're going to talk about enrollments and capacity. The schools are currently over capacity and have been. The need for security, safety, and other physical plant operational upgrades. The need for contemporary educational and learning space to keep moving forward with the goals educationally of the district, and other needs such as fields, athletics, and so forth. And the overall solution was to implement a series of upgrades, to implement a new 5-6 school and the high school improvements, as well as a couple other things that we'll walk through here. And the plan that has been developed was considered very carefully in terms of that scope, and we'll talk about that. So just quickly to remind everybody in terms of enrollments. So the blue bar you see here, that is the district's current enrollment at about 3,769. The purple line represents the district's capacity. So you can see, looking at those two numbers just today, there's a deficit of a little bit more than 300 students over capacity. The district has been managing that through various means that have been discussed. Now, if you look at the red lines represent the first 5 years projected, and you'll see both a trend line, a high trend line, and then a lower line. So the high trend line was an original projection that was done by the district some time back that included the broadest range of potential COA housing from the settlement that was pending. And that was then revised to pull all of that housing impact out of the projection, with the exception of 3 specific developments that were already permitted and approved to move forward. Now, as you know, the recent court settlement yielded a specific number and a specific time frame, which is between the 2 parameters that those projections were based on. So the numbers that we have been working with, the final court settlement should yield projections that are within that range, somewhere in the middle. We have not done a new projection yet because we are trying to ascertain details on the types of developments that would be used to satisfy this court settlement and so forth, because the types of units can impact the projection, and where those units would go would impact where the projection would fall in the district. So we are trying to move in that direction. We don't have that updated projection yet, but our planning numbers encompass where that projection should put us. So specifically, the referendum plan implement 5 key components. The elementary school and middle school upgrades. These are physical plant upgrades to the existing buildings. A new 5-6 elementary school at the Valley Road site. So 5-6 elementary school here offers a wide range of educational benefits that the superintendent has reviewed at various presentations. But strictly in a numbers sense, it allows us to tackle also the capacity issue in the district. The 5-6 combination allows us to remove 5th graders from the elementary schools while still maintaining those neighborhood elementary school orientations, and the 6th grade from the middle school, where there is a significant portion of the capacity problem currently. So in so doing, we create a new school offering new opportunities. We create also space for the elementary schools to absorb their capacity or their growth as enrollments grow. And the same with the middle school. We give it immediate relief, and we allow it to absorb the growth that is coming. The high school renovation and expansion consists of the infilling of the existing courtyards around the building in an effort to expand inward, if you will, try to prevent impacting the already stressed area around the building with limited parking and limited site to work with. There are a variety of athletic and field improvements that are in the referendum currently. And also, in order to enable the 5-6 school to be constructed here on land that the district owns at Valley Road, the district administrative functions need to be relocated. So there is a property that's being considered by the district for a new facilities, maintenance, and operations base. And the district administration is being proposed to move to an addition, expansion, and renovation at JW Middle School. So first, let's take some of the upgrades at the various schools. So HVAC upgrades, air conditioning being added to classrooms that don't have air conditioning currently, as well as the cafeterias. There are a variety of security and safety upgrades. These include secure vestibules that will be implemented at the schools, visitor management systems, and upgrades to doors, hardware, and other features around the buildings to improve safety and security. Accessibility also would be improved through door hardware, door improvements, signage, and other features around, or other improvements around the buildings. The buildings will be configured so that they would be able to be hooked up to generators. Currently, the installation of permanent generators is not in the referendum, but we would work the electrical panels and the systems in the building so appropriate loads could be served by portable generators brought in on an as-needed basis. Also, that allows the district to, in the future, potentially add generators should the need be determined to be there as a priority. Electrical service upgrades associated with the need for additional electrical use in the buildings, as well as the air conditioning that's being added. At Little Brook, there are some upgrades to the library that are being considered in the referendum, that library being one that was not expanded or improved quite the same in the prior years as some of the others were. And at two schools, specifically Little Brook and Riverside, we are also adding some doors within the building to compartmentalize the building so that a visitor in the building can no longer travel freely through it. We can isolate areas of the building for night events and other things. So that also is part of the safety and security upgrades being undertaken. At the middle school, there are a variety of improvements, some similar, electrical upgrades, air conditioning and mechanical equipment being replaced, air conditioning being added to classrooms and the cafeteria where it doesn't exist, the pod areas, the equipment being upgraded, building upgrades to the entry, again, for a secure entry to be implemented at the school, as well as a connector between the C&E wing. Currently, students traverse outside, so that will be improved both in terms of circulation and security to allow that covered passage to occur there. Renovation of the old library. This is the space that was vacated when the Learning Commons was developed, and this will be developed to serve both school use and, in the current plan with the district administration moving to JW, the potential for board meeting use in the evenings. Acoustical upgrades specifically to the cafeteria and the commons, the area between the Learning Commons and the auditorium. When those areas are full of kids, trust me, it's very loud, it's very difficult for activities to happen in there. And recognizing the need for substantial parking demand that isn't met at both the high school and the middle school campus, we're looking at adding pull-in parking spaces along Franklin Avenue to add approximately 40 or so spaces. At the high school, in addition to the renovations and the expansion that I'll go through in a minute, a variety of also upgrades and improvements similar to what we've described, also including elevator upgrades, roofing, the shingle roofing being replaced. There are some water issues, as you know, around the drainage basin outside the auditorium. We're looking to mitigate that. I won't say that it will prevent that happening in the future, but we're looking to make that less likely in terms of what could happen there. And also building entry and security upgrades similar to the other schools. So at the Valley Road site, the new 5-6 school, you see the existing Valley Road building here. The field's also part of the property, as well as the parking area back here. The site, once you take aside the area that's dedicated to the fields, is a fairly tight site, but it's workable for the project. And the intention would be to honor the history of the existing building and the new building that's being created, including maintenance of the main stone arch on that building would be integrated into the design, as well as upgrades for the fields. In terms of the new building, how it would lay out, you see the new building plan here, approximately 87,000 square feet. Now, this building is designed for a capacity of about 660. However, it's also designed to absorb a capacity that would be higher than that. So that should more than enough encompass the 5-6 that is projected so far for the district. There are separate drives for safety. Separate drives for safety. Parent parking drop-off on this area off of Valley Road. Bus, staff circulation on this side to keep those traffic patterns separate and make it as safe and effective as possible. The main entrance to the building would be off of this location on the site right here. This is Valley Road. This is Witherspoon running down the side. We're cognizant in the design, and we're working closely with the township. There are some, obviously, town hall. There are some emergency services facilities nearby. So we're looking closely and making sure the circulation and activities work with the needs of those facilities. To quickly highlight the way the plan works, this is the interior, the entrance to the interior. There would be a foyer, security point, and so forth. The office, and some spaces in this area that would be accessible and usable by the community, a conference room off of this foyer, the ability for a visiting doctor or dentist or someone else to come into the clinic or the nurses area there. Those functions would be able to be integrated with the use of the facility without those visitors entering the school itself. So they remain outside of that security perimeter. There are a variety of features, indoor and outdoor learning spaces around the building. This is the athletic or the activity core, gym, cafeteria, kitchen. Cafeteria, and specifically this area of the building is referred to as the heart, a new centerpiece which is both a gathering space, an educational space, an activity space, and can serve a variety of functions for the students at the school as well as community use. This area on this end is the learning communities. There are 3 per floor. The design is still being developed and in fact is changing slightly from this plan, which is what was presented to you at the last presentation, to add some additional programmable spaces and divide things up a little bit differently. So we will be presenting that as soon as we have the opportunity. And this is an image of, this was presented again about a week or so ago. This is an image of a similar space previously built by Fielding Nair, the firm that we are partnered with to work with the district, just so that you can get an idea of the character of this type of a space. This is not literally what it would look like, but there are some similar features here. So you have a grand stair that can be used by students throughout the day in small groups and for various activities, classes and multiple classes, as well as gathering in large groups and community events which would happen, and then a variety of uses based on different furniture and activity areas in the space around it. So the high school, as everybody knows, the high school is a beautiful building, great history in town, widely regarded with a great sense of feeling and connection and heart in and of itself in terms of how people see it. That said, it does have its challenges, specifically inside the building. It's grown over the years, a series of additions. You have a number of small, dark corridors that are always very, very crowded during the day, difficulty getting to and from classes, and the building does not currently have the types of spaces that are desired by the faculty, by the students, by the curriculum in order to teach the way they would ideally want to teach. Right now they are dealing with the limitations of, in many cases, rooms that were designed 50, 60, almost 100 years ago and are not the kind of rooms that are needed for education today. So we're looking to tackle that, but tackle it in a creative and effective way in terms of the impact as high as possible and the cost managed carefully. So specifically 3 steps I'll walk you through. That new secure entry that would come in through the tower, the feature of this opening courtyard, creating a new heart, which would become kind of the centerpiece for the school and connected to the entrance, and taking the other 2 courtyards and also creating a series of spaces that would be developed to serve educational, social, informal learning, and other activities in the building. So the corridor circulation system, which is currently overloaded, gets augmented by what I'll call kind of these 2 freeways, or these much broader circulation zones that are being created in the building that will now take the blunt of that circulation need from getting to space and within those different areas. The learning communities, the classrooms, then are connected in different ways to feed into these areas for circulation purposes, and so that students and teachers can move from area to area and avail themselves of a greater variety of educational space, and also to allow some of the corridor space to be converted to actual educational use, therefore making the building that much more efficient. Just quickly to illustrate, the courtyards would be infilled. You see here an example in the main courtyard of similar steps would be created here at the high school to what you saw in the image for the 5-6. Multiple levels would be added to fill those courtyards, each level connecting to the classrooms on either side to allow the students to move around and also to provide a range of educational space. An image that suggests what the inside of that would look like. The walls would not all be white, but this is conceptual at this point, so there's not a lot of detail developed into it in terms of color and material. We're working on that. Another view of what one of the new commons areas in one of these courtyards might look like in terms of use, the multi-levels, and the ability to access these different spaces. So in addition to those improvements, there are a variety of additional steps that are also considered in the referendum. Specifically at 3 sites, we'll talk about some athletic, field, and related improvements. So turf fields, there is currently a turf field in the referendum, the lacrosse field, which if you're at the gyms in the high school, tennis courts, across from the tennis courts you have the lacrosse field, which would be turfed. There would also be a net that would be installed along the side of that field. There have been some issues with balls and activity spilling out and causing problems. So that's a safety feature. We are looking to build a small concession bathroom and support building out in the field area. This would provide people access to bathrooms, access to water, and access to other needs in that area without having to go into the building. We're going to look to improve around the tennis courts and try to prevent the water from draining across them, which provides wear on the surface. The fitness gym at the high school will be renovated. A partial second floor will be installed in that space to allow that space to serve a broader range of needs. This includes wrestling, it includes other fitness needs on the various levels, and other features, basketball backboards being replaced, indoor water fountains. There are not a lot of them near the gyms, where obviously there is a need given the kids and the activity and so forth. We're looking to motorize the existing bleachers in the main gym, which will allow the bleachers to be moved in and out much easier, the space to be changed over much easier between activities, and should maintain the life of those bleachers because it will be a smoother operation, as well as a lift system to handle the wrestling mats when needed. At JW, softball fields will be upgraded in terms of the infields, dugouts installed, backstops upgraded. Water access also here would be provided out in the field areas. A multi-sport scoreboard would be installed, and again in the gym, motorized bleachers for the same reason. And at Valley Road, currently the fields there are proposed to be turfed, as well as additional play surfaces created around the building for use by the students at the school. The varsity field outfield, there is the issue in the outfield where it kind of slopes up the hill, where we will pare that back. We'll build a retaining wall, fencing above to keep the balls in play. You know, it's been suggested that could be just like Boston here, but I don't know. You guys will have to decide if that's how that's going to work out. Backstop upgrades, dugouts, water storage, and bathrooms are being constructed attached to the school but accessible from the outside. So when the fields are in use and the school is closed, those amenities could be available. And then the last component of the plan is district administration. So our budget for the referendum includes the purchase of a property, and on that property, construction would be undertaken for a building to house the maintenance operations, including offices, the shops, storage needs, and also transportation needs, including the parking of the buses. The second part of the administration step here is the addition of the main administrative functions to the middle school. So this would be a mixture of addition and renovation. With the renovation, we're trying to connect the library space, upgrade that for, again, school use as well as administration and board use, put that space to use and reduce the amount of space that needs to be added there to be as cost effective as possible, and also provide a broader use of space to the school during the day. So in terms of the costs, the superintendent mentioned the overall number, and this is how it breaks down. I'll talk to you about it in 2 different ways. This breakdown is by school. So at the top you have the elementary schools and the middle school. These are the renovations and upgrades that are happening in those buildings that I described. Each school and the value there in the budget, and the total for that grouping, just over $15 million. And again, these costs are what I refer to as project budgets. So they include hard costs, material and labor. They also include contingency allowances for fees and the various other costs that we would anticipate as part of a project of this type. The Princeton High School upgrades and the new 5-6 school are listed both there. This includes the site improvements that we've mentioned and the building improvements that we've described for both of those. And then the three at the bottom, the fields and the turf upgrades that I described, the administrative, transportation and maintenance building and the purchase of the property, and the administrative expansion at JW. So in terms of what this means, the estimated additional annual tax impact, about $167, about just under $14 a month. And that's based on a rounded figure, just a little over 137 million, 30 years. You see the interest rate there. And the anticipated impact does include what is New Jersey debt service aid. So these projects receive debt service aid in various ways. Specifically, renovations are receiving a higher percentage of debt service aid from the state because of the way the formula works. New construction a little bit less. But there are a range of eligibilities across these projects that yield the impact. So that state share impact is considered in the estimated annual tax, additional tax impact. The other thing we have done as part of this picture, in addition to being careful about the scope and trimming the costs and the scope to arrive at the dollar figure that you have here, there are other components that are not part of that cost picture. So specifically, there are upgrades at the various schools that we are pursuing under what's called an ESIP, an Energy Savings Improvement Program. So improvements at the schools that are needed that will save energy can be packaged in a way that, as long as they can pay for themselves within 15 years, we can undertake them under what's called an ESIP. And this includes things like lighting, mechanical upgrades, and other improvements to the schools that will yield enough savings to pay for themselves within that period. Now, we've identified potentially over $19 million in possible improvements that could be part of an ESIP. The first step of that process is underway right now with the district, the local government energy audit being prepared for the district. Once that is received, we'll be able to get into that in more detail. And the ESIP improvements can move forward independent of the referendum. Although what we are doing is we're carefully coordinating, so we don't want to duplicate any work, and we'll be structuring that accordingly. But that's a good opportunity for the district to, again, get potentially as much as an additional $19 million or so work done without adding that to the referendum cost and without a tax impact. And save energy, yes, beyond 15, for that 15 years and beyond. So looking at some of the costs, breaking them down a little bit differently, these are not additional costs, but these are just a different breakdown of the numbers you've seen. So safety and security, about $5.6 million worth of safety and security improvements across the various buildings. Mechanical, HVAC, air conditioning, electrical upgrades, about $11.8 million in that mix. Athletics, there are the fields, which is the number you saw earlier, the 5.17 number. But then there are other upgrades, as I mentioned, the fitness center at the high school and other improvements at the gyms that will benefit athletic programs. So that total is a little bit over $12 million. And then the balance is the other renovations and new construction that are part of the picture. And with that, if there are any questions from the board.
Can I ask you a quick question, Scott, on the, when you were showing the Valley Road building?
Yes.
Somebody had raised a question in the meeting today that it looks like, I think it's Callahan, I'm not sure if that's the road, that it will not extend through to Harris.
Correct.
I don't know if you want to pull that up there again, or it's just,
Sure.
if it's necessary, but someone today raised the question the way the drawing is. It looks like we're continuing the road on.
I don't think it shows much of this.
On that one, at the bottom of the screen, it looks like it's gray all the way through.
Well,
That's just a border rather than a road.
I think that's just the border, yeah.
Yeah.
So the only impact to the roadway is right here. So the roadway that currently runs alongside this building would be interrupted. So you would pull in that same curb cut, you would access the drive and parking in the front, but this continuation through would be stopped. That's the only roadway impact that's part of this.
Thank you.
Scott, I had a question about the cost savings. So the last one that you shared was the 19 million, that's the potential, right? The 19,500,000. You also said 14% was state aid.
Correct.
And I calculated that's about 20 million, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So does that mean we could potentially get back of the 137, we're not paying 40 million of that?
Yes, that's correct. Well, No, I'm sorry, you're right. Not
Okay.
correct. Not correct, thank you. So the 137 million is the budget. The tax impact, the estimated additional tax
Yeah.
impact you saw there already considers the state debt service aid,
Okay.
okay? The ESIP is not included in any of
At
those
all.
numbers, right? So the ESIP is potentially an additional $20 million in improvements that you're obtaining without cost
Additional.
to the taxpayers, right? Yes,
So the total budget, though, is 137, 20 of which is state aid.
correct.
So the balance to the taxpayers are 117.
Yes, you could look at it that way, although the state aid comes in the form of
Afterwards.
debt service.
Okay.
So, which is why, to be accurate, we consider it in the tax impact calculation,
Okay.
but it doesn't directly reduce the budget, the cost.
The total amount.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Can I just follow up on that? Is it conceivable that that number will change, the percentage from the state?
So the debt service number we're working with is an estimate. It's based on our evaluation of each of the projects. So these projects will be submitted to the Department of Education. Our goal is mid-April to do that. So part of the Department of Education's review process is to approve the eligibility for state aid. So they will look at each project, they will calculate that number, and yes, it's possible it could come up different than we're projecting it. But our projection is purposely being a little cautious in terms of how we're assessing it right now, yes.
Thanks, Scott. That was a great presentation. Do you know, have you worked out how much of this referendum pertains to security?
So the security and safety features total about $5.6 million.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's across the various schools. And that's features specifically directed at security, so security vestibules, upgrades, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we do the renovations to the high school and the 5-6 school, there will be additional features that will relate to security. I haven't isolated those numbers. But specifically upgrades directed at safety and security is about $5.6 million.
And then do you have the breakdown for, I saw that there was going to be a lot of HVAC work, and everyone in the district knows our buildings could be more comfortable. Do you know how much we're spending on the HVAC?
Sure. So HVAC, if we look at the second breakdown by type,
Okay.
I actually can't read those numbers
Is that 11 million?
with the light, but I think we were at about 11.8,
Wow.
if I'm correct. Is that, yeah. So
And-
that's HVAC equipment replacement. That's air conditioning, both upgrading air conditioning equipment that's there and adding in some places.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are electrical upgrades that are necessary to allow that to happen. So those are included in that number also.
And that's because the buildings weren't designed back in the 50s or 60s to run air conditioning. Is that right?
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
Can you explain briefly the generator hookups that we're proposing, just given the power outages we've had lately?
Sure. So in order to accommodate a generator, we have to make changes to the electrical configuration in the building. So, we need to determine which loads will be supported by the generator, which ones won't, and there's some modification of the panels and the circuitry that's necessary. And then we will create a hookup so that the portable generators could be brought in and connected to the building in the case of a need. Generator use at schools runs the gamut. It's pretty rare that you would install a generator that would fully support a school. The loads are substantial. The generator would be very, very large. More often than not, when generators are considered for schools, it's a partial load, life safety systems, keep the hot water pumps circulating, things of that type.
But you couldn't run the school? You wouldn't have school the next day if the power went out midday?
Well, with the typical generator that we would look at, no, because the generator would not fully power the building. It becomes a very substantial cost. So, when we had looked at it, we looked at generators that would cover part of the loads and handle the emergency and the life safety and the more urgent needs. To expand that to run the entire building as if the building were operating normally would have cost twice as much as we were considering at that time. So this step allows you to move in the direction, allows you to be generator ready, if you will, whether it's from portable equipment or from a future permanent solution that might be considered.
And am I right in remembering that with the full building generator, that would require installation of a fuel tank of some sort at each building?
Yeah, so that size generator would require a fairly substantial fuel tank. That would be part of it. When you get to the kind of size of a generator you would need for a full building, natural gas becomes very costly, so you end up with other fuel sources, which, you know, you're going to have a storage tank of some kind associated with it.
But just to follow up, the cost of portable generators, or the idea of them, could you have a portable generator or two that would go to whichever school needs the generator at any given time? And what would the cost be of just one of those?
In terms of the portable units, I'm not quite sure. You certainly could. I think what we had discussed was the possibility that the district could structure some arrangements with entities that might be able to provide them. Okay. And that way you wouldn't necessarily incur that cost directly, but it would be on an as-needed basis.
Thanks for the presentation. Every time I hear it, I understand a lot more about the project. And I'm going to preface my remarks by saying I think we need to sharpen our pencils. I think that's a really big number. And as much as we may want to characterize it as, oh, it's only $163 a month, for some people in town, that's a deal breaker. That's a budget buster. That's something that they can't manage. And so I think that we need to be acutely aware of the kinds of things that we put in our school which may protect us for 1 or 2 days a year, or a couple of weeks a year, or for something that might happen that's not life-threatening or not connected to education or academics. So while I think it's a terrific plan, and I'd love to be able to do everything on that list, I think that it would be prudent of us to, again, put the eye shade on, sharpen the pencils, and take a hard look at what we really need, and to right-size whatever it is we do so that it enhances the educational experience for all of our children, but at the same time doesn't break the backs of our taxpayers. Having said that, I'm interested in finding out what will happen with this plan in terms of review by the planning board. Is this something that goes before the planning board? What's the, is there any obligation? Does the planning board have any veto power, or like how does that happen, and how long does that take?
So the process that would be undertaken here, as I mentioned, we will be submitting to the Department of Education in mid-April. Mm-hmm. The goal being to get their approval in time to meet the election deadline so the October 2nd referendum can be held. The submission to the Department of Education in mid-April, a copy of that submission goes to the local planning board. The local planning board, we've interacted with them. They, describe the projects to them so they know what is coming. Technically, the submission is what's referred to as a courtesy submission. Mm-hmm. So the planning board will go to them, we'll do a presentation. They can offer their thoughts and so forth, and those thoughts can be put in writing and sent to the department and become part of the project submission that the department will be reviewing. The planning board has also expressed their interest that we would submit a more detailed or a full submission for the property that's being acquired. And, their considerations with regard to that, that's certainly something that we can do. The property that we are looking at is, has previously been approved for use. Our use is similar in nature to that, so we don't anticipate it will present any challenges. But that more extensive submission will be undertaken.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in the traffic flow with Community Park across the street, the municipal building across the street, emergency services that are going to be in the area. And so as we, and this being a very congested part of town at the beginning of school anyway, and I just want to make sure that we don't have casual conversations with the police and the town planners, that we have detailed conversations so that we don't create more congestion in this area than we already have in the morning. So sometimes getting in and out of CP can be a real challenge for parents and people who need to go other places. So I just want to make sure that we have that conversation, because I know the planning board is very thorough in those kinds of things. And also we'll look at having traffic analysis and counting vehicles and all those kinds of things. So I hope that's part of the plan.
I could speak firsthand from what you speak of. I've experienced it a number of times. So we're very aware of it. We have had initial conversations with the township, with the planning board, with the police regarding the needs, and those conversations will continue. So, you know, our design process is only kind of the tip of the iceberg at this point. The submission to the Department of Education is our primary deadline right now. That's a, they call it schematic, but it's basically, it's a very basic level submission. Once that submission is made, we will continue to interact with them and develop the details, and certainly after the referendum, there is a detailed design process that will happen, and they will absolutely be a part of that. So, you know, we recognize the concerns, and we're sharing the same interest as all the other parties involved in this part of 10 to make sure that things work as effectively as possible.
I also have a question about who determines what the tax levy will be. And I know we can estimate, but the final arbiter is the tax assessor for the municipality?
Well, I'm actually going to punt that question to your 25-year business veteran here.
Well, it's 5 years I wasn't here. That's actually part of the county that, they're all estimates. Even when I do it for a budget, I estimate it. The final comes from the town tax department as well as the county tax department.
Okay. And my final question is trying to reconcile Steve's numbers, the numbers from Steve's presentation, with some of the numbers that you've talked about. And I know we've got, there is a time when it kind of peaks for 2 years there. I think it's 20 and 21.
21 and 22.
21
Right.
and 22. So, and that's when we're paying off the debt service that exists.
Correct.
But the new debt service has kicked in.
Right.
Okay. So that debt service is on top of whatever increase we have for the operating budget, correct? Because we don't know what that's going to be because that hasn't happened yet, right?
Correct.
Okay. That's all I wanted clarity on.
Thank you for the presentation. Could you speak to learning spaces again? I know there's a lot of interest in the community when they look at the pictures of the high school. People still are having trouble understanding kind of where the kids are going to learn and how that works and what it's like compared to now. And I'm just curious where we are in the process. We've talked a little bit about this, about doing an assessment or having a number of saying, right now we have currently this many classrooms, and after the renovation we anticipate we'll have this many types of spaces. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So we've been engaged in a fairly detailed process with Gary Snyder, the principal at the high school, and his team. And that process is ongoing in terms of not just assessing the spaces that are programmable, but how exactly he would potentially use those spaces. What programs would go where, how they would interact, how they would work together, where faculty might be based. So we're getting into a fairly deep level of detail to make sure that any concerns or questions are flushed out. The you know, the key concept that is being implemented here in the design is not a reduction in spaces that are programmable, but a greater variety in the range of the types of spaces that can be programmed. So whereas right now you have an array of classrooms, you have some science labs, our goal is to move in the direction of where education is migrating, which is a much more diverse field. So we have, you know, students who are learning differently in small groups, who are doing independent projects, who are learning in lecture formats, you know. So the ability of the teachers and the students to enhance what they can do by being able to adapt their programming to different spaces. You know, one example, one teacher indicated to us, you know, the way he'd really like to teach is he'd love to get 3 classes together so that he could do the opening part of his lesson that he would normally do 3 different times, you know, during the day, 15 minutes, and then depending on how the project would develop or how the exercise would develop with the kids, might be some independent study, there might be some other groups. So spaces like the steps that you see in the courtyard can facilitate things like that, you know, more effectively. And from the steps, the classrooms are right there. So, you know, it becomes an exercise in, you know, even a particular period may happen in different types of spaces. So it is a little bit of a different programming in that sense, but we're looking at it very carefully to make sure that the concerns are answered, and we know exactly that we're providing exactly what is needed.
Thank you. I guess one other thing, I've heard about this the last couple of days, and it's been the first that we've kind of seen all this too, but the air conditioning, to me, my first reaction was, well, at Riverside, our kids, they kind of suffer, but they figure out where to go. They have the window units, why do we need to do this? But then I kind of thought about it, and I realized, I think one of the most important things we do here is for the long term, right? I guess the last time we did a project like this was, 17 years ago, where we actually created significant new space in the schools. And obviously we want this project to last for 20 to 30 years. And I'm kind of thinking about how many actually teaching days or school days we've lost now, I think, in the last few years because of heat, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that as a board, we need to think about, looking into the future in the next couple decades. I don't think that the heat problem is going to be getting any better. So I do appreciate the way it's been thought about. I realize we're putting it in some of the classrooms, not necessarily into the gyms in some of the buildings.
Except the high school.
Except the high school, where that's obviously a lot of people understand why we need that in the gym.
Graduation.
So I appreciate that kind of long-term thinking. And the same with the generators. I mean, 10 years ago, I think many of us would have thought that was really a frivolous thing. Why on earth would you put a generator in a house in Princeton? And I think in the meantime, we've all learned a lot about the weather and about our what's going on in our climate. So I appreciate the forward-looking thinking, and also the ESIP funding, and the fact that we're doing all this energy efficiency, I think, is really important. And we're finding $20 million worth of value to the taxpayers, which we're essentially not paying for, which will help us with operating budgets going forward. So I think that's really important. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Scott, I wanted to ask you, the plans that we're laying out here for the public is basically going to impact every child from pre-K all the way through to high school. And the public's been very integral in helping us narrow the design, helping us think through what are the opportunities now going forward with our timetable to continue that discussion with the public, because there's so many different aspects here, and so where in the timetable will we be able to point people to look for to continue to help us as we move forward in the process?
Right. So the ongoing interaction will happen not just with the public, actually, but with teachers, students, and others that are part of this process, have been and will continue to be. I will be a regular fixture in front of you. I hope that's okay, between now and October. So we'll avail ourselves, particularly at board meetings when people are already oriented to seeking information, to make sure that the questions get answered. We are also going to be scheduling a series of events between now and October to make sure that we have some public information sessions, presentations, and other things that will occur on a regular basis. There will also be ongoing development of communications. As we get questions, we'll develop answers. Those will get posted. So the information level and the response to questions that people are having will continue to build between now and the referendum in October. But the process doesn't end there, because assuming the referendum passes, the detailed design needs to be done, and it will be a interactive process. The process we have had to date, meeting with literally dozens and dozens of different groups to seek their input, will continue, and the end result is a better project from that kind of effort. We know that from experience, and it also helps people understand what's coming, because in some ways, as you've seen, the educational space we're looking at is a little different than some of what might be in the schools now, and there are reasons for that, and there's a lot of value. So making sure people understand the value coming from that process is key to that also.
Just briefly, Scott, I just want to thank you for welcoming all of us into the process, because at the very beginning, I mean, you can tell we ask a lot of questions, but we're thinking about this as parents, some of us, community members, obviously elected board members, but we're all taxpayers, so this affects us as well, and I appreciate you really being open to our questions, and it is a long process ahead, so we'll be asking. Thank you.
Michelle, you raised the question about sharpening the pens. I think yesterday in Facilities Committee, today in Finance Committee, we went over, two different groups of people went over the same line items, and I think almost 1% got knocked off, maybe 0.8%, and that was going $10,000 items here, backboards there, a net here, and it was, I mean, when you look at what was left at the elementary schools, I mean, there's nothing glamorous that's left. It's security and infrastructure. It's making sure our electricity's in phase. It's a little bit depressing to think that we don't have anything more glamorous, but it is bare bones as far as I can tell.
Right, and to your point, Bill and Michelle, I think as we do this once in a quarter century renovation and improvement to our district, we not lose sight of the forest for the trees. So I would hate 20 years from now, 15 years from now, for someone to say, well, why didn't the board do this then? Or why did they take this out? And I think as stewards of this district, we have a responsibility to do what we think is the right thing.
I don't disagree with that, but I also think that this is more than sticks and bricks. If we claim that we value and treasure the diversity of this community, and we don't look to the socioeconomic diversity of this community, and we build a wonderful school district that only people of a certain economic status can take advantage of, then I'm not really so sure who we're serving. And so I just want to keep that at the forefront in terms of what we're talking about and what we're doing, that this is something that we're thinking about as well. That's my point.
I mean, we've been thinking about it. I've been on the board. This is my 3rd year. We established an ad hoc committee specifically to seek revenue from people we haven't been institutions we haven't been getting revenue from, just with the purpose of reducing the impact to taxpayers. And when we go, Steve, Stephanie, Betsy, Greg, and I, we go to the institutions, the first thing we say is, we're here, right? These are tax-exempt institutions, and we say, we're here because we don't want to drive the middle class out of Princeton. And we don't. And we've been working on this for 2 years. We have a responsibility to the children and to our community. And with the fair housing settlement, it is clear we were going to have a significant influx of children. And as Bill said, there's nothing fancy. There's nothing fancy. There's no ice skating rink. There's no, you know, llama park. You know, we're, and we have been, I think, using a fine pencil.
Just to add to that, Michelle, I mean, I agree with you, and I've always thought that. I've always been concerned about keeping a economic diversity in this town. On the other hand, one of the things that we're building for is economic diversity because of the fair housing settlement. In effect, you know, sort of enforces a economic diversity, and that's one of the things that's causing our enrollment to rise. So there will be a balance, I think. Second thing, someone pointed out to me recently, and I never thought about it, because we do think about this a lot in terms of we don't want to raise anyone's taxes at all. On the other hand, you know, we have people who are going to a building that was built, I think, in 1928 or 1929. When I moved here, and whenever it was, 15 years ago, that building was already built, and people before me had paid for that building. And, you know, I moved in and got the benefit, and my children got the benefit of it. Same with the community park. It was built in the 50s. You know, it was paid off by the time my kids showed up. And every generation or so, it's time, it's part of what this community has done over the hundreds of years is you build it, and you have to pay for it a while, and then it's an asset, and other people get it. It's just a natural progression. We can't shirk that. I mean, I think one of the things that people pointed out about some of the additions that we did in the last time around is that they look awfully sparse. And, you know, it doesn't really reflect our values of you know, building quality for education. So it's always a balance, and we totally, you know, hear your point that we've got to balance it. But I think we are working on it. We'll continue to work on it. You know, nobody wants to build a palace. But, you know, on the other hand, Scarsdale spends probably twice as much as we do on education. It's a different kind of community, obviously, but I think we're all working towards that goal. We'll continue to do it.
I'm going to keep talking about it, so
good. Okay.
Let's keep working on
it.
Good.
All good. Any other questions or comments?
Scott, if you could just, I wanted to ask about the administration at JW. That's considered renovation or new construction?
So we're working on that now. In terms of the layout, it would be a mixture of addition and renovation is what we're looking at. you know, the space doesn't really exist in the middle school to simply absorb the use into the building, even with the change in the grade alignment. So it would be a mixture of the two.
One comment, just a quick one, that I guess when Bill, you said in some of these, you know, elementary schools, there's very little that you can see or that's kind of exciting. It's like the electricity or the HVAC. But I just wondered, and you know, I talked about it offline with a few people, but I wanted to mention it to you, is, you know, is there a way, even if it's for the furniture line item, it doesn't have to be, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars, but I think it would be good, you know, for all the constituencies in town in terms of the different buildings to be able to point to something that they can see, even if it's a renovated lobby, you know, if it's carpeting and furniture in a lobby, but it's a, you know, hangout zone or whatever, you know, you're good at, you know, creating these kinds of ideas, but, you know, it would be good to, I think, to have something that everyone can see in their building and say, if we approve this, we will walk in and see this thing, not just something behind the wall. And it doesn't have to be, it could be a few, you know, a few $1,000s, but something to make every building look a little different, to me, would be important. You've passed a lot of referendums, so you would know, but I think that might be something that we should think about a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a good suggestion.
Our security will be very different.
Well, security is a good one. You can see that, right? Yeah.
And we're not changing. We don't have to raise it anymore.
True, it's already budgeted, right? Yeah.
Right. You're going to walk in the front door and your children will be secure.
Safe.
You'll see it in the front door. I just had one last quick question, and this is something that people come back to me on again, and I think we've probably talked about this weeks ago, but I just want to come back one more time. I've had people say to me again, well, why are we building a 5-6 school? Why can't we just put everybody into, why can't we put people into JW, make it bigger? We have all that land in front, and why can't we just expand all the existing grade schools? Why are we building a brand new school? And I know you guys have costed this and looked at it, and maybe you could just speak to that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, this was not absolutely not the first solution that we landed on. We looked at a pretty broad range. We did look at additions at each of the elementary schools. Each of the elementary schools poses different challenges. You also have limited space issues there at the building, so the likely result would be a larger addition, perhaps at Community Park, for example, but then you would have to redistrict. So you would lose the current neighborhood school configurations that, you know, people are comfortable with. We did look at things like 5-8 schools in terms of whether that would work. We looked at additions at JW. You know, JW, for example, you know, the need for capacity to satisfy the current grade configuration at that site would be substantial in terms of the amount of space we would have to add. We would have to double up on core spaces because of the number of kids. You would be up over, well over 1,000 students that we would be looking at. So the site itself just doesn't really support that. And then you add in the fact that between those two campuses, you don't have enough parking as it is, you don't have enough fields as it is. So you then concentrate even further the problem in some regards. So those were just some. We looked at a very broad range, including even other options before landing on this one. You know, admittedly, all of which may offer some pros and some cons. But this seemed to offer the biggest range of advantages, including, as the superintendent has gone through, on the educational side, with the benefits of the 5-6 configuration as well.
Okay. Any other comments, Greg? Yeah, go ahead.
Very, very briefly, and this is not a question. This is just a comment. And Scott, I just want to thank you again. And I also just wanted, listening to your presentation, I was struck with how innovative we're trying to use our space and get the most value possible. So from the high school of building inward, from putting the administration in the middle school, from maintaining the neighborhood integrity of our elementary schools. There's been a lot of thought put in, and I want to thank you for helping guide us and guide the community. And I guess I just also want to appeal to the community to continue to work with us. We need your ideas, we need your input, we need your help. And we're open, and I really appreciate the openness of the process. So thank you.
Thanks, Greg. I think you know, we did put off the public. Some people brought their snowshoes out tonight to come and see this in person. So we do want to give them a chance. But again, I just thank you, Scott, for all your work. And I thanked a lot of people when I started tonight, the community, and I didn't thank the person who has really been instrumental at pulling all this together, which is Steve Cochran. Tremendous amount of work that, Steve, you've done over the last, well, 2 years really, but in this calendar year, It's just been a superhuman task, and we all appreciate everything that you've done to pull all this together. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, so with that, we're just going to, I'm not sure what letter it ended up on I guess on the real agenda now it's different, but old item E, public comment. If anyone has any questions or comments from the public on any matter at all, agenda or not, this is your time to do so. And if you just, hello Mary, if you just identify yourself and mention where you're from, that would be appreciated.
I'm Mary Clerman, and I live across the field on Harris Road. Okay, so I think that I have to agree with the lone voice of color here, Michelle, that the number 137 million is even worse than 128 million. And every time I mention 128 million to people, they say, "What are you talking about? I've never heard that." So I think the number is scary. I think that you have to consider that there's you know, I don't pay taxes. I don't own the house, so I don't pay taxes. The rest of us, $156 a month is nothing. But when I think about, when I think about people for whom it is something, I think that's significant. And I would really like to see, this question about how tax increases have affected some families but not others, and how big houses have caused small houses to have higher taxes than they might, and about white flight and middle class flight. And I'm just concerned that I'd like to see the Board of Education members, as individual citizens, press the town council to consider a tax consideration for people whose property values are skyrocketing along with their taxes, but who are not going to get any benefit from this until they sell their houses. And if they sell their houses and move out, who's going to buy those houses and who's going to knock them down? I think these are issues that should really be considered. Anybody thought about that?
Mayor, I just point out one thing, and you said, and I think Michelle, you said it too. It's not $167 a month. It's a year over the course of this 30 years. So anyway, just to clarify.
Is that right?
Yeah,
because I understood him to say per month.
It's the latest numbers that we got from our tax advisor probably minutes before we went into closed session, it was 167 over the 30-year period. That's annually. So it would be and because we have current debt that retires in 2023, the years that the new debt overlaps with the current debt, those years there will be a higher annual cost. But we were looking at $680 for the whole year. So you would divide that 680 by 12. And the following year, 827. The third year, 812, I think, and then dropping to $319 for the year as the additional tax impact.
So the $800 is, sorry, you're saying it's $156 for a year? Yeah, I guess explain that.
The average over 30 years is...
Yeah, that's not the same thing. People will have to pay the tax now.
The average over 30 years is 167, but we were clear that in year one it was around 680. It could be 677, something like that in year one. In year two, it's just over 800. In year three, it's just over 800, and then it drops to 300. But that's 319, 300. But it's for the whole year. Okay, but I think that the fact, Michelle, am I not right that if you have to pay $600 the first year and $500 the second year and $400 the third year or whatever it is, you
have to pay those amounts just for the debt service on the referendum. You also would have to pay additional taxes for operating the schools. Like, for example, we're going to vote tonight on a tentative budget that has an increase, and so that increase will be X number of dollars. Then the referendum tax impact is in addition to that.
So what is if you say that the increase is going to be 3 point something this year, what was the amount of tax increase in dollars per household last year?
It's $159 for this coming year. It'll be $159 per average assessed home at about $837,000. Last year, I believe the number was $188 per average assessed home.
Okay.
Well, can I just point out too?
Annually.
We haven't gotten there yet, so I mean we're sort of jumping ahead in the agenda. And this, by the public comment period, is a time for public to make comments. This isn't really Q&A of the board. So if you want to make a statement,
I've seen in the
please feel
past
free.
that you actually answered questions, and it's the town never does. So it's really nice to have that you do. Okay. The other question I have is, why not wait? Why not do the high school now, and wait to do Valley Road later, after the debt service is retired? I'm sure you've addressed that. We'd like to hear why. Thank you.
Well, I would like to answer that. I'm the parent of an 8th grader at John Witherspoon School. 3 weeks into school, I got a phone call from my son's case manager saying he has to switch social studies classes because there was 31 children in the class. And that's today where we're at 730-something children, and we're 100 or so over capacity, where the projections show, and I think they're very conservative projections, that by the time my daughter, who's in 5th grade now, will be in 8th grade, there will be over 900 children at John Witherspoon. So right now, again, 730, 740, there's 30 kids in a class. I can't do the math and talk, so, but I have to believe it's between 35 and 40 children in a class. And as both you and Michelle have said, we know that Princeton is on the more expensive side of towns in this area. But as Pat said, and I've been talking about for 2 years now, communities like Scarsdale, their tax levy is double ours, and they don't have the range of needs that we have here. So I just want to go back to the John Witherspoon, why we have to add on to a school. 900 by the time my daughter is in 8th grade, and 1,000 kids in 5 years. Is that correct?
7 years,
7
8
years.
years out. Yeah.
And there's another reason we can't split referendum, which you, Stephanie, maybe you can mention. But I will point out that we don't always get, we get some people on some nights and some people on other nights. And I remember quite clearly about a year or maybe a year and a half ago, we had at least a few parents who said, my son or daughter is in high school now. Why hasn't this board focused on this before now? Why is she in this crowded classroom? Why didn't you think about this 2 or 3 years ago? You could have seen what was happening. We did. But as I've mentioned in other forums, we've tried to do it without a referendum for as long as we can, cutting up classrooms and slightly enlarging class sizes. So there are people out there who are saying, we see it and feel it and know it, and my child is living it, and why didn't you do it sooner than now? So there's always two sides to every question, and I'll just point that out. But to answer your question, and again, we don't want to get too much into Q&A here, but the question about why we're not doing multiple referenda, if you could you speak to that, Stephanie or Scott, whoever? Why wouldn't we do 2 different referenda in different years?
I mean, we were talking about that today, that we were asking about that in finance. Somebody was saying, why don't we split it into 2 referendums? And I guess maybe 6 or 8 months ago, we were talking about it, a different group of people in either finance or facilities. And it was, the advice we got was, you'll never pass 2 referendum a few years apart. You'll get 1, but you'll never get 2. So maybe we could get to high school, but then we'd have the JW.
I just remember reading your architect Nair's recommendation in his book that in one school he worked with, the school came in asking for $100 million, and the town said, no, we're not going to do that. But then they were able to do a part of the project in 1 year, and the public liked it so much that they were able to do the second part of it, and then in the 3rd year they were able to do the 3rd part of it. So it can happen. And I do have one more small question. I live across the field here, and we watched this field being redone at, I suppose, significant cost all day, 7 to 3, all summer. And now I think you're talking about returfing that too. Is that true? Turfing it? Putting artificial turf on that field?
One of the proposals is to turf.
Why are you doing that when you just did the other? You don't have to answer that now, but I'm asking you.
Well, I can say that our athletic families, a turf field is more versatile. So it allows.
Why didn't you know that before?
Well, I wasn't on the board when.
I'm not accusing you. I'm asking the board. Thank you.
Well, again, I would like to point out that I think part of the problem with the Valley Road field is that there wasn't enough money in the referendum to deal with some of the issues, and so these are the things that I'm cautioning my fellow board members. We don't just to take you know, like Scott said, and we didn't point out, there are contingencies in our referendum. I think we were between 11 and 13%, and I like to refer to it as a cushion, but I was told that's not the appropriate word. But so what I'm saying is, in that number of 137 million, of which 20 million is, you know, roughly state aid, 5.6 million is on security, 11.8 million is on HVAC. We have 15 to 20 million dollars of a buffer so that we don't run into these things again. And Stephanie, if you can explain why, what will happen if we don't use that money?
So when we go out for referendum and it's X amount of dollars, when the projects are all done and there weren't any unexpected surprises, if there weren't any surprises at the end, if there's any money at the end, it is used back to offset debt.
Terrific.
That's what you want to talk about. Right?
Okay. I had another question, but I guess I'll get to it later. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Mary, thank you for coming and asking hard questions and
It gets
for
me
making
all
it through the
upset.
snow. And hopefully you'll be back next time.
Thank you.
And perhaps that idea, you know, which has been asked to me as well about the waiting until the other debt service, perhaps we could show enrollment-wise why that's just not possible. So perhaps we could come up with something for our website about what enrollment at each of our schools would look like in fall of 2020 without this.
It will also cost a lot more money. Long-term interest rates are going up. We all know, we don't know where they're going, but we have a limited window right now where we can still try to get some reasonable financing, and I think it will cost a lot of money if we have a delay. Yeah.
But I have to tell Mary, I was here, and I do remember doing the Valley Road decision, and there was not enough money to turf Valley Road, so they took the money that they had, and they tried to give that field as much drainage as they could to make it as playable as possible. Turf gives it the maximum playable time, because with turf, then you can play more. But I remember seeing them push the dirt from one side and back again, and that field not being playable for a long period of time. And when I saw that they were going to add turf to it, I had the exact same feeling that you did.
Do you know how much it actually costs? The work that was done?
It's a checkable fact, but it's one of those things that there was not enough money to put turf. Turf is the better long-term solution, but
Right.
they did the best they could with the money that they had for the students at the time.
I would like to add that when parents used to watch, the parents who have lived in this town for 20 and 30 years used to watch their kids play on that field, and now they walk their dogs there. Well, as soon as you finish the work on it, you put up signs saying, "Don't come in." This is not for the public. Just,
Thanks,
you know,
Mary.
it was just a little insult.
I'd just like to say, which I usually say at public session, just be mindful of the other people behind you. We have a line behind you now. So, so Dr. Corrala, I think you were next.
Bob Correll, I teach at the high school. Two quick things. One, so this was the first time I saw all the details about the different fields. It brings back bad memories for the coaches at the high school when all the fields were under construction at the same time. We replaced the turf field at the high school. We fixed this field. I just would hope there would be a better scheduling of the replacement. So, because especially with the later dismissal time, those fields are going to be under a bigger premium. So I hope a scheduling of the work, which does need to be done, is just done in a more thoughtful manner this time. That's one thing. Second thing, I was asked to ask by people because as best I can read the calendar, maybe you mentioned this earlier today, that we've already used our allotted snow days. So the question is, what's going to happen now? And I don't know if you have an answer to that yet.
I will have an
Okay.
answer to that. I'm waiting to see what
many?
Snowmageddon brings and how many days we're actually out, so that I'm not answering the question multiple times. But I will have an
Fair
answer.
enough. Thank you.
But
Yeah.
can we do say that May 25th is a school day? That Friday.
May 25th was gone in January. That
Yes.
was the
All right.
first snow day, right?
Right. Yeah.
All right.
That's the Friday before Memorial Day. Yeah, that was gone with the first
Okay.
snow day, is my understanding.
That is correct.
Okay.
Dr. Quill, one quick question. You teach at the high school. We've been talking about air conditioning. A yes or a no, is it necessary for your classes?
So let me answer the question this way. I taught for, I don't know, 9, 8 years in what was room 264, which doesn't exist anymore, with no air conditioning, where the sun came up at 6 o'clock in the morning from the southeast and reflected off the cafeteria roof. And I would walk in at 7:30 in the morning, and my classroom was already 95 degrees. Yes, but more than that, a working HVAC system is needed. Okay, it is functional, but not great at this point. Would be my generous statement.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kip Cherry. I live in what used to be the township. I think we're missing a lot of people in this room right now, so I just want to join Michelle really with a reality check here. One of the very special things about Princeton has been that it was diversified and that we kept it that way. We made room for people at all economic levels. And that gave a special education to the people that grew up here, too. It wasn't just to be just, although that was certainly a major reason. It wasn't just to have diversity. It was to teach things to the kids that they couldn't live in the classroom exactly about other types of people, other economic levels, other racial types, other ethnic groups. And I'm afraid that this is really putting a lot of pressure on that, something that's been here in Princeton for hundreds of years, something that's made our town extremely special. I think that you're forgetting all the folks who live in the Johns Witherspoon area, for instance. My own neighborhood, which is very moderate, really can't afford this kind of increase, which you're talking about $1,000 roughly in operating expense plus a capital expense, and that doesn't even include operating expenses increases over the next few years. That's just for 1 year. So I would like to see less overlap. I don't know. I realize that the classes are crowded, but I'd like to see less overlap in the capital activity going on. I'd like to see a lot more sharpening of the pencil, and I realize that, architects, and I've been in the architectural business a long time, will spend as much money as you got. And when you say to an architect, I don't got that much, a lot of times there are savings that can be found, different ways to look at things. And I think actually that Michael Graves did his best work when he was told, hey, you've reached a limit, come back and figure it out to do it more cheaply. And it'd be used different materials, all kinds of different ideas would begin to come to the front. So I think that there could be costs cut out of this. I don't mean to pick on Steve's administration building, but that seems enormously expensive to me. And I just think that there are a lot of costs that can be found. One of the things I want to mention, again, I mentioned this before, is that I think these grand spaces are questionable. I don't think that kids necessarily do that well in the grand spaces, these heart spaces. And I mentioned this before, that this is really not Princeton. We have constant complaints about the lobby area in the Taj Mahal. And so maybe this is something that you all think is great, but I think that the Taj Mahal is a municipal building. It wasn't it wasn't my name, but this is the name that people have commonly used for that building since the beginning. And Michelle, of course, was mayor during that part of that time, so you can see why she might be defensive. But I think that you really need to keep that in mind. I'd like to see spaces used more economically. I think that grant space is unnecessary. I think it's neat to make some space available to the public, conference room, that kind of thing. The reason that didn't really happen before on Judy Wilson's watch was because the expense of using school space was so high. There was a requirement for a bond, I think, many times, and nobody could afford to use the space, so it wasn't used. I realized that there had to be some security and cleaning and all this sort of thing, but when you put it all together, you're basically telling the public that they really weren't wanted. It's kind of the way it came out. So you have to be very careful about user costs. I wanted to ask you, going back to the flexible classroom space, I still have concerns about that. I still think that kids do well in structure. I like to see a lot of whiteboards around, and I'm still concerned about how that space is going to be used and whether the kids will really prosper in that space versus a more typical classroom space. And I might add that, you know, when I was a kid, my favorite space of all was Mr. Drury's classroom, which was a real narrow classroom. We got archaeology in that room, and that was really opening a lot of eyes, that archaeology. And Mr. Drury was a wonderful person, wonderful teacher, and went on to teach at the university. It was a very long, narrow space, but, you know, we did well in it because the topic and the teaching quality was so good, and that was the key, not the classroom, but the quality. The cafe idea, you know, everybody's into cafes these days, and but I still want to mention what I mentioned before, which is that if you have it near where the public has access, then the cafe could be used at night. I'm not sure it's still located that way. You know, for a play or something, you could have access to the cafe. I wanted to ask about solar and, you know, how that fits into this. And I really didn't hear, I guess this is one of those payback sort of an idea. But I'd like to see solar much more integrated in what this is all about. And maybe geothermal, you know, some other ideas too. I want to mention also traffic safety. We have an awful lot going on now already on Witherspoon Street, this part of Witherspoon Street. Fortunately, we've had no fires, no major fires in a short period of time. I think the last major fire was the Sultan restaurant, and I was working that day over at Michael Graves' office, and there was a big fire across the street, on Saturday, I believe. We haven't had major fires, and we've been very lucky. But if there is a major fire during school hours, especially if the kids are just coming home, there could be some terrific conflicts. And now we have the PFARs coming over here. They were over near the shopping center for good reason. It was in the heart of the community, and now they're really going to be more on the edge in some ways, and I'm not sure that they're really in the right spot. But anyway, that's where they're going to be, and all of a sudden, you know, there could be vehicles tearing out of there. So I really think that needs more thinking as to how we're going to handle that traffic conflict. So I think that's it, but I just want to leave you again with this notion of who we are, Princeton, that we are a very, very special place because we are multi-ethnic and multiracial and multi-economic. And I think that, you know, affordable housing creates, you mentioned balance, but there's an imbalance because the people in the middle are going to have real trouble surviving. And those are the people that kind of keep the community going. They're the volunteers. I would hate to see Princeton lose that group. We're talking about seniors, we're talking about housewives, we're talking about people with 3 jobs, we're talking about all kinds of people in the middle that scrape along and really can't take a major increase in taxes, which is the one thing that they have no control over except to vote. So I just leave that with you, and I do think that if the pencil's sharpener, I'm sure Scott can come up with some real cuts here and there and everywhere, and I know you said 10,000 here, 10,000 there, but I think he could come up with bigger cuts than that by being really creative. Now, I mean, you're talking about building a new administration building. Maybe you could find a building to renovate instead. I don't know. But I'm just saying you've got to think outside the box on this. I really do. And I don't think you've talked yet to a lot of the voters out there who are going to be really worried about what's going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just
sure, Scott. Yeah,
on a couple of points?
Yeah.
First, I can assure you at least one architect is interested in cost savings, so we will continue to work on that. There are opportunities. We are still working on the design for the administration and so forth. Our budgets include an estimate on the square footage. We're going to try and tighten that up. But specifically, I wanted to mention solar. You're right. I had failed to mention that. Solar is absolutely something that we're looking at. But similar to the ESIP, so that it doesn't add to the referendum costs, we're going to seek to do solar under a power purchase agreement. Meaning that, again, the district can implement the solar, can benefit from the savings from the solar, but doesn't have to put out the money to pay for the solar up front. So that is absolutely part of the consideration, but it doesn't show up in the referendum numbers because it is being handled separately. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks, Scott.
I should just parenthetically say I thank you for the limestone arch, and I meant to say thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, we will move to item H, which is the harassment. Pardon? Oh, yeah, since there's a blizzard raging outside, Scott, I think if you've probably had enough, you have plenty of chance to people ask you questions. Any other questions for Scott, you can find him in the hall outside. Thank you, Scott. Yeah. Okay, so now we are on item H, the harassment, intimidation, and bullying report. Could I have a motion to open discussion? Debbie, and second, Greg. And this is a consent item, so I don't. Yeah, so there's no vote on this yet. We're going to vote on all the consent items at the end. With that, we're going to move, and there's no questions or comments, I don't think, right? With that, we'll move to item I, which is the board committee reports, and given the weather, we're going to ask that everybody kind of keep it as condensed as possible. Maybe we can put more on the website, or if there's other details. So we'll start with our student representatives. If you guys would like to start first, I don't see you on the agenda, but I know you're. Oh, there you are. Oh, you're up top. Amy Wang and Brian Liu, please, if you can start first.
So we wanted to start a report by updating the board on the upcoming alumni panel. I recently met with guidance and the district administrators and representatives from the Alumni Steering Committee with a group of other students from the PHS Student Council and the Youth Advisory Committee. So far the students have met, and we've developed preliminary questions to ask during the panel. The panel will also be on Wednesday, June 13th on a 1:49 day at the PHS PAC. And we're currently in the process of reaching out to alumni, so we appreciate any feedback you have regarding the event or any cool alumni that you know who we can contact. We also wanted to bring up the efforts of the students at Princeton High School, specifically that of Ruth Schultz, Talia Feaster, and May Coatson, who organized the PHS walkout. An incredible amount of students turned out for the walkout in the morning, and students engaged in various action steps afterwards, which included voter registration, speaking to Assemblymen Zwicker, Freeman, and Benson, calling and writing to congressional representatives, and hosting a bake sale to raise money for the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. And around 80 students were registered to vote on that day. $300 were raised through the bake sale, and and hundreds of non-perishables and period products were collected for the Trenton area soup kitchen.
All right. So although we are sad that the Meet the Board event was canceled canceled because of a snow day, not this one, right? We're going to use this as an opportunity to make it better, or as some of you may have brought up, larger posters. Yeah, I've heard that one before. For the rescheduled one on April 12th, as probably all of you are aware. So, moreover, the snow days also gave us time to watch the documentary called Race to Nowhere, which we did per recommendation from a board member here. And we found the movie to be very insightful within our own personal lives, and it brought up several points that we believe to be reflective of experiences that many of us go through in high school. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the film, it uses interviews from the perspective of students, teachers, education and health professionals, and college counselors. And we think it would be a great platform to start discussions within health classes, like PE and health classes, as to better practices and action steps for the community. The film actually features the Stanford Challenge Success organization, which is something we're probably all very used to at this point, which is a viable way to integrate conversations on some of the survey results that were collected this year as well as last year. We are also looking to explore other documentaries that might achieve similar goals as well, and wanted to see if the board had any suggestions that they could offer for us. In the future, we're looking to integrate contemporary films on the topic of balancing academic achievement with emotional well-being into our current health curriculum. To that end, we've been discussing the possibility of doing so with our physical education and health teachers. And so far, the teachers that we have spoken to so far have been very receptive and very warmly so to this idea. And we wanted to possibly create a segment in the health curriculum to show the film, talk about our school, as well as see what tangible steps students can take to promote their own well-being. And with that said, I hope you're enjoying your first day of spring. Good luck with the winter storm.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Amy. And so next we'll turn to facilities. Chair Daphne Kendall.
So this whole meeting has been about facilities, so I'll try to keep it brief. The facilities committee met yesterday. The committee reviewed the plans for the referendum and made some revisions. On tonight's agenda is the authorization from the board to allow the district to enter into a purchase agreement for 900 Herrontown Road, formerly the SAVE property. The district is proposing to use this land for offices for our maintenance and facilities staff, as well as bus parking. The next facilities meeting will be on April 27th here at Valley Road. Prior to this meeting, as has been discussed, the board will vote to approve the submission of the referendum package to the Department of Education on April 10th. We have the ability up until that point to make changes from now through that vote. So please let us know if you have any comments, concerns, or suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next, Finance was Chair Bill Hare.
And I was about to say that since all of today's meeting has been about finance, but I guess we keep seeing a lot of the same people in these meetings. So Beth, Greg, Debbie and I met today with Stephanie, and the architect, Scott, and we went over the bond referendum. We tried to do an item-by-item cost cutting. We talked about that a little bit earlier. We reviewed the 2018 proposed budget, and now we're going to try to cut some costs there. Then we did some brainstorming on cost cutting, and one person had the idea of like a onesie thing, and another person said, well, why don't we try to do a district-wide program so we get all the experts involved. So thank you, Beth, for that idea. And so we talked to Steve today. We're going to try to put something on the webpage at some point to allow the experts in the district, the employees, the students, to give suggestions on ways we can cut some costs where they see there's something. So that's all from finance, or should I go on for another 10 minutes? Yeah. No? I'm not sure if Greg or Beth or Debbie had anything they wanted to add.
Just very briefly, I think that's a really great idea. And second, we realize how difficult a financial situation and fiscal situation it is for the community. And I just wanted to commend the entire Finance Committee and the entire board for how carefully we've been trying to go through the numbers and coming up with ideas. Just very briefly, I wanted to just report that on the state level, we very much appreciate the increase in state aid, and we very much appreciate the plan that this increase will continue for the next 4 years to get us up to full funding. But we've been warned by the New Jersey School Boards Association that these numbers aren't set in stone. And so the situation at the state level remains tenuous as well. And so I think the best thing possible, and this is here where I want to thank our superintendent and Stephanie Kennedy for thinking through and planning as carefully as they are how we approach this tenuous situation, including the fact that we're trying to use all the waivers that the state is offering to us in order to protect our students and protect the services that we're providing to them right now. So thank you. Thanks for that.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Next, Personnel Committee with Chair Debbie Braunfeld.
Personnel Committee met yesterday, and Brenda came to present an update on the communication audit that was completed in 2017. Two things the district's added per the audit is a new district website and an alumni affairs outreach organization. The committee also discussed creating a protocol that would be listed on the website so that parents would know the chain of command to follow if they have a concern in the area of curriculum, business, transportation, facilities, special ed, or staff. On March 14th, PRESA, which is the Princeton Regional Educational Support Staff Association, and the negotiating team met for 5 hours. The parties agreed to a 2-year extension of the current contract, which now will go through June 30th, 2020. PRESA will look to hold a vote with its union prior to spring break, and the board will hopefully be able to ratify the tentative agreement at the April board meeting. The committee reviewed a 5-year staff retention chart for the years 2013 through 14 through the current year. District-wide, there's been an increase of 21.1% in Asian staff members, 43% in Black staff members, 44% in Hispanic staff members, and 4.3% in white staff members. Total staff has increased from 672 in the 2013-14 school year to 755 in the 2017-18 school year, which is an increase of 12.4%. And I have the chart if anybody really wants to look more at the detail. In April, the Personnel Committee will meet with the administrative officials to make decisions on all non-tenure candidates up for reappointment during the 2018-19 school year. A Central Jersey Pride job fair was held at JW on March 15th. Over 350 candidates were interviewed by 20 school districts. The Walnut Lane Film Festival will be held on Sunday, May 6th at the Princeton Garden Theater. The festival will feature short films by JW and PHS students. The committee reviewed the list of March leave of absence. Lou Goldstein, head of HR, returned from a recruiting trip where he visited 5 southern states, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana, 10 colleges, and drove 1,600 miles.
10 biscuits.
And had 10 biscuits. Based on hiring candidates from southern colleges, the committee discussed creating a community resource forum. This forum would connect new staff members with community volunteers who are knowledgeable about Princeton and could assist a new staff member with local questions about housing, childcare, doctors, faith-based locations, and more. Starting March 29th, the district will begin to hold residency hearings for those families who have received letters from the district questioning whether their child is properly domiciled in Princeton. 3 retired police officers or security professionals have been hired as building monitors at PHS. One of the monitors would have started tomorrow, and well, hopefully he knows. And the other 2 will start after spring break. This will be at the front door, at the tower, and at the PAC. And then, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Lots of good news in there, and I guess we'll wait to celebrate on some of it until everything's ratified, but very excited about that. Okay, next policy with Chair Greg Stankiewicz.
And we're going to keep this very short, but just to give everyone a roadmap for tonight, we have 4 policies that are bylaws that are up for second read, minor changes from the first read, and we'll cover those when they come up. We have 1 policy that is actually we're bringing back up for a first read again, and it's we've renamed it Equality and Anti-Bias Policy. We think it's important enough as a goal of not only the policy committee but the full board and the district. We'd like to take a few minutes when we get to that point and fill the context. Yes, please. We were asked to do that to give more time. Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Outside of that, our next meeting is on Friday, April 13th. Hopefully that's going to be auspicious, not inauspicious, and our public comment period is at 10:15 on that Friday.
Okay, thanks, Greg. And next, student achievement with Chair Betsy Baglio.
Thank you. We met once since the last board meeting on Friday, March 9th at 11:30. The overnight trips and the day trips that are on tonight's agenda were approved. Brenda Sewell attended student achievement to give the group an update regarding the new website, and she is communicating with the website provider quite often to work on some of the functionality. She will return again on March 26th to discuss a parent survey. Princeton Public School staff attended to tell us about some recent parent programs. So Reynold Foreman, Joanne Krause, Donna Goodwin, and Lauren Smith shared with us their family literacy and math nights that have been held this year for parents of incoming kindergarten students. And Christina Donovan also attended to describe the parent chats that she's had with each of the elementary schools and Princeton High School. The next student achievement meeting, and this is important to note, is not Friday, March 23rd, which was a glitch in the website that has now been fixed, so thank you. It's actually Monday, March 26th at 11:30, and the public is invited to attend.
Okay, thanks, Betsy. And next, Ad Hoc Alternative Revenue Committee. Chair Daphne Kendall.
Okay. Earlier this month, we shared the news that the Institute for Advanced Study will contribute $100,000 each year for the next 5 years to the district's operating budget. We're very appreciative of this meaningful contribution. As you have heard tonight, our budget is very tight, and this contribution directly alleviates some of the financial burden on our taxpayers and district. Once again, the committee would like to thank the Institute for their generosity. We are continuing talks with other nonprofit institutions and hope to have more news to share soon. Thanks.
Great. Well, we thanked the whole committee last meeting, but you can never thank you guys enough for all you've done and for all the counterparties in town who have helped out. We can't thank them enough either. So we do appreciate the partnership that we have with these institutions. Next, the Equity Committee with Chair Betsy Baglio.
Thank you. We met Thursday, March 1st at 9:30. So the committee and those present spent this meeting further delineating the next steps related to data gathering and identifying potential funding sources for the future for this work. The Equity Committee will meet with Princeton High School supervisors next week, and that will help as we begin our work of articulating the costs related to our public education, to our families. The next equity meeting will be April 12th, Thursday at 9:30. The public is also invited to attend.
Okay, thanks. And so now we turn to our middle public forum. This is on agenda items only. It's because of the weather. We don't have as many people here as we usually do. But if anyone would like to speak on agenda items, this is the time to do so. Yeah, there's only one person left who hasn't spoken, so this might be your chance. John. You still have other chances. If not, then we'll move on to item K, which is policies, and that is a consent item. But if we want to discuss any of those policies, we need first a motion for item K. Betsy, and a second. Beth. Okay, any questions or comments on any of the policies that are on?
So wait, policies or bylaws? I'm confused.
You have a first reading on one policy, which is no action, it's just.
Which is the policy that Greg mentioned. Right. So K1, well, K1, at least as it is now, is, unless you just changed it.
I just changed it.
Okay, so sorry, I should look at the, maybe I have to refresh my screen.
Oh, where's refresh?
Start over.
K1 is the first reading.
Oh, I'll just look at yours. Okay, so this is the first reading of the anti-bias policy that Greg just mentioned in his report. So if there's any questions, comments, anything you want to add at this point, Greg?
Sure, if I could take just
sure.
2 seconds. And I think the entire policy committee just wants to very briefly outline what we heard from the public, what we heard from fellow board members, what we heard from the district, what we heard from the superintendent. The reason why we're focused so much is partly we want to acknowledge the hard work that came last year from the policy committee. We also want to acknowledge the hard work and important work that's going on as we speak across the district. We looked at the policy and we decided that the policy is whatever policy we come up with, and we can come up with the best policy in the world, it's just a very small component of what we want for the district. And we want to build on what's happening, and we want to learn from what's happening, and we also want to acknowledge the distrust that we hear from many different parts of our community who have experienced slights and hurts that have gone back generations. We also want to use what we're learning now to try to create what we feel is an environment where not only every child matters, but every person within our schools feels welcome and feels supported. And so with that, I'd like to ask Michelle to just very briefly read what we came up with as a modification based on the input we had from the board last meeting.
Great, happy to do that. Okay, it's we renamed the policy Equality and Anti-Bias, and it says the Princeton Board of Education affirms the right of every student, teacher, staff member, employee, parent, and all those present in our schools to be free of bias-related or hate-motivated behavior from any person or institution. It is the intent of the board to foster mutually respectful relationships that promote a sense of belonging and an affirmation of diverse identities and cultural ways of being among all members of the Princeton Public Schools community. Behaviors or statements that seek to degrade or diminish an individual or group on the basis of race, ethnicity, culture, heritage, immigration status, sexual orientation, gender, gender identity, gender expression, disability, physical, mental attributes, religious beliefs or practices, or based on association with a person or group with one or more of these actual or perceived characteristics shall not be tolerated. The Board of Education is committed to the elimination of biased and hate-motivated behavior. The board shall pursue this objective through monitoring and regular assessment and evaluation of reported incidents and the district's response to these incidents. Through policies, procedures, and processes, the board and school district are also committed to being accountable, consistent, and transparent to the community in its pursuit of an environment of fairness, kindness, and respect for all.
And then I wanted to ask Beth to sort of fill in a little bit of the framework that we've been discussing.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. I think that we as a committee really would like to get beyond words. I think we want to really look at our obligation as a board to think about the effectiveness and implementation of our policies. We can write a very beautiful policy, but if it doesn't really make people feel that it's working for them, it's not really worth anyone's time. So I think we're also, as our committee, we'd like to put together kind of the big picture of how this policy gets implemented and look at our codes of conduct and make sure our codes of conduct at all levels mesh with each other and reflect the policy. We'd like to look at putting in place, possibly supporting the administration and putting in place a reporting mechanism for issues that arise under the policy. We'd like to have a look and make sure we understand that the implementation, the regulations and the procedures, which are not necessarily the board's responsibility, but we'd like to support the administration in making sure those also comport with the policy and we have a kind of cohesive whole. I think we'd like to make sure we could do some sort of brochure. We may have something on the web page. We may do training and education. But obviously the board is here to set the policy, but we also want to be supportive and ensure the implementation happens. So we're looking at the larger picture, and we want to make sure we've got all the pieces in place as a whole to make this actually work.
And then finally, I just wanted to turn it over to Jess as well.
I think a lot of it's been said, but the effort, I think one of the things that's been really clear in the conversation that we've had as a new policy committee is that we're building on work that's been done by previous committees and boards, and also we also see this as a conversation with the community, and so we want to lead by setting by having a policy that sets the tone and keeps a big picture in place that reflects the values that are so important to all of us, and continue to look at models of districts that are doing this work really well and hold ourselves to a really high standard because it matters that much.
And finally, I just wanted to say that we're looking forward to working with all members of the board on this, and that's why we brought it back as a first read. And I also just wanted to acknowledge the hard work of our student representatives, who are one of the groups that are co-sponsoring an event on April 12th that we believe will help bring the community together to learn about suspension policies and best practices. And we want to draw from all these different sources of information to help us as we move forward to create a comprehensive model that's transparent to everyone.
I just wanted to add, so I appreciate that we're putting this on for first reading. I appreciate the new policy committee's time and effort on this policy. And I just wanted to point out that the genesis of this policy was, I think, almost 18 months ago, where there was an incident of bias, and a parent came to one of our policy meetings and said, what are you doing about this? What's happening? And Steve said, well, we can't talk about individual students. And we realized at that time that there was nowhere in the district that we could point to say, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. So like for alcohol, it's very clear. If you are drinking alcohol or controlled substance, you are suspended for 4 days. I think also you go to counseling and other things. If you bring in a knife, you're suspended for a statutory amount of days. But if you commit an act of bias, whether it's racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, there's nothing the district has to point to that says, this is what we're doing. This is what will happen. These are the steps we're taking. And so that was what led us to, and I'll admit that policy wasn't perfect, but we did spend a lot of time on it. And the goal, again, was first to say hate doesn't have a home here, and coming from the top down. And also to say these are the measures the board wants taken in the event of an act of bias. And so I hope that with more discussion, we can come to something that fulfills all of our goals for this policy.
And I also agree. I really do appreciate that it's on for first reading again, and I'm really excited to engage in the work. So maybe, Stephanie, we can figure out, I don't know, how more of us can be at a meeting than 4, or we can take turns, or we can have a few meetings. But I think this is important enough work that, okay. Okay, so maybe we advertise, okay, which would be great. That would be great. And I do really appreciate the opportunity to do that. And I'm also thinking, I was looking at some of our other policies, perhaps drafting a regulation to go along with our policy, right? A regulation is more of the procedures, the sort of what happens if. Is that, am I understanding that correctly? That some of our policies relate to following regulation XYZ, we will refer to that. So perhaps we're also thinking about developing a policy, but a related regulation as well. So let's get that meeting scheduled. Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah, I also have a comment, because to me, just reading this, I feel like it's just a mission statement. Yeah, of course that is how we feel, and I think I said all this last time too. So I also need some action from it. I need there to be something about a consequence, and that's why I am so unhappy with what it says. To me, it's really a mission statement with no consequence if you do something. And then that's where I'm coming from, okay?
And you said that last time, which is actually what made us, I think Bill said it too, that's what made us kind of go back to the drawing board. So what we've changed is we will monitor, assess, and evaluate reported incidents and our response. So first of all, one, you have to acknowledge that these things really do happen. So that's in there. And secondly, we have a policy that we will create policies, procedures, and processes for the board and the school district to make sure that we do what the earlier, that we institute anti-bias policies. The trick is, who's supposed to do that? Is it the board that we issue regulations and we specify what's supposed to happen? Or do we say to our superintendent and our leaders, this is what we want to happen. We want to count these things. We want to know what your response was. We want to be able to compare from year to year. We are going to review this on an annual basis to make sure we're responsive. So that's kind of the space we're trying to work in.
But we want students and teachers to know that we are serious, that if you do this, this will happen. That we're serious about these things happening to other students, other teachers, other parents. I think that's where I come from.
So is that our job as a board, or is it our job to create the policy and then say we want you to create a list of consequences for these when these.
But I guess I need to see it in there. I need to see it in there.
That was my question,
I think
too,
this policy says that. I think that what you're asking for begins with strong policy, and this is very strong policy. I really like the policy.
We will have about 15 other documents that we will be looking at to see the guts of how they plan to implement it, and then we will say we will check. We want to have a report back to us, right? We're going to have. It doesn't work with just a policy or just a procedure. It needs the whole picture, and we want to make sure we get the whole picture and it fits together, and we're all in our lanes doing the jobs that we're supposed to do. So we set the vision, we set the policy, they implement it, and we check on them, and they come back to us, and they report, and then we evaluate and say this policy worked or it's not working. And it's an ongoing process. There has to be education. There has to be, as I said, there has to be reporting. You look at the University of Wisconsin that Mr. Cochran has shown us in the past 2 years. It's a very fulsome, effective cascade of items, from reporting to people designated within the administration who are responsible, and it's reported out to the public, to the board. There's a lot of pieces to this, so we can write one policy, but then there's a lot of more work to do. So I look forward to doing it with all of you.
Well, that new sentence kind of jumped out at me, that the board shall pursue this objective through monitoring. And so I was like with you, Debbie, a little bit. Okay, so what is that monitoring? when is that going to happen? When have we done it? At what point do we realize, gee, we should have done this already and we haven't, you know? And so are we going to say that quarterly there should be this? And I mean, I think there's two things that I've seen over the years with these sorts of incidents. One is the kind of whataboutism that people say, well, you know, this person did this, and what about this other person that did something worse and didn't get that? There's a lot of that going on where people feel that there's not clarity and there's not justice that's applied equally across different incidents.
And that's why we have accountable, consistent, and transparent.
Yes. Right. So I think we can, I mean, you can build off of this, but then the other thing that you get is, I think, you hear the it never happened syndrome. You know, people say, kids or students will say they don't feel comfortable or something's happening, and then the adults will say, no, it wasn't like that. Oh, they heard it wrong. They misunderstood. And you hear them over and over again, oh, no, that wasn't. Well, that's the first, it was already fixed. And so we get a lot of this when you hear these things, and we only hear sort of snippets of what happened, or maybe one incident that might be part of a pattern, but you don't know as a board whether it's a pattern or not.
So if you have, for example, and Steve's talked about this several times, where you have an online reporting system where you input what happened and what was the response and how you were harmed. And so if we get a report back and it says, wow, you know, this happens 5 times and there was never any response by the district, then we know. But if we don't start counting, if people don't have a place to go to report this, and we don't monitor it, that's why it's part of a policy. What I'm interested is institutionalizing this. I don't want to roll off this board in 3 or 6 years and then turn around and there's, you know, crickets because nothing's happened. So this is the first step toward institutionalizing it. And we're going to try things, and they're not going to work. And we're going to have to try different things that work and fit for this school district, but it's got to start with the policy. And this is not perfect. We need help with tightening this up. But I think in terms of what our mandate is, this is where we have to start.
And we have a policy, for example, 5600 is on pupil discipline, and I know you're looking to, we need to, as a board, revise all of these to fit with the new New Jersey School Boards Association. But there's a line that says, so it's the 5600 policy, and then it says, Regulation 5600 shall include a description of school responses and consequences to violations of the behavioral expectations established by the board. So whether that's our administrators who create that sort of list of practices and follow up, you know, what we need is that to accompany the policy, and then show parents where do we find the regulations so that everyone can be aware of them.
And I just wanted to point out, just you jogged my memory, we had administrators of JW in the high school ask us to craft the policy this way so that it would help them in disciplining for these, you know, acts of bias. Sorry? Sorry?
A procedure, yes.
They need a procedure and a regulation. We got a policy, then we can, but I don't disagree. The substance, we need all of that, but we need to have it in the right place.
Okay. So I think to be continued, right? There'll be a second reading, and if we want to, on the second reading, are we going to see some of those policies or directives to the administration? Because we're a board, we don't do this stuff. We might check on it, but we don't do it. So would there be something attached to this that says, now here's the for lack of a better word, like the regs under this policy?
We came up with this at our last meeting, and we're doing this kind of quickly, but I think the idea is at our next policy meeting, we'd like to go over this with the administration and get their input. We've put together a chart already of all the documents that we think are part of this puzzle, and I'm sure we missed a few, and there's probably more we will come up with, and I think we're looking at models, and I think, so by the time we get to a second reading, I think we'll have a better sense, but we need to obviously work with the administration.
I think it's a very smart idea. I think you're looking at bias can be very clear and cut-dried in terms of acts of hate, and the consequences should be very clear. Bias can also be very nuanced and complex. If we're talking about unintentional or implicit bias, then our responses may need to be different. And of course, the people who have been harmed by bias need to be empowered as well to have some control over what they see as a remediation that works for them. And one of the things that we look at in models such as the University of Wisconsin is, yes, they have a reporting system, but they also have people on the other end of that reporting system who have been trained in how to really counsel and talk to people who have been impacted by bias. And they have lots of avenues for remediation at their disposal. And so they can counsel people into a pathway that makes sense for that individual, and it doesn't always lead to a disciplinary consequence. We are a learning institution, and our goal is to help all of our staff, our students, our families to grow and learn as we become more racially and culturally literate. So I think we're trying to approach this in the right way, and I appreciate the holistic view of codes of conduct, the idea of getting students involved in outlining what kind of environment they want to have in their schools and how they define the bias and acts of bias, and the resources that we can make available to those who are targets of bias and have experienced it, and those who may be perpetrating it. There's a lot to what we can put together that I think will be helpful for the community as a whole, that will go beyond just consequences.
Well, we can talk about this all night, and it's a subject that I think we all feel strongly and passionately about. But just a couple of points just to remind everyone of a few things. I remember a couple years, maybe last year, Steve, you suggested having a sort of bias officer or somebody to deal with an administrative position that dealt with bias incidents. And my comment at the time was, your bias officers ought to be your building principals. Like, that those people have to really lead and lead by example and be the person who is the chief bias officer in that building. And if you don't have that, it doesn't work. In my opinion, you've got to have strong leadership in each of those buildings on these issues. And, I think too, we can, have a goal about implicit bias and all that, but what I've seen without sharing, confidential information is incidents of if we could just deal with the explicit stuff, that would be a big win. The implicit stuff, maybe we can do that in 2019. But in 2018, if we could just get rid of the explicit things, it would be wonderful. And again, it's going to take some building leadership, and maybe that's the part where we start training. But it's up to you, and I think this is a good first step, but we need to continue this discussion. But thank you, Greg,
right.
and the whole policy
Pat,
committee.
just as a point of order for boardsmanship, I mean, we are a board by committee, so I do think that's inappropriate for us to have a committee meeting with more than the committee. I think the committee has to bring it to the board, and the entire board discusses it as we're doing now. So the committee does their work, and then the committee brings it to the board, and the board discusses it.
Could we have a board workshop where that is sort of the topic of the conversation? Because I agree, the policy committee should certainly lead the way. I'm not trying to...
Right, so, I mean, I just wanted to make sure
Right.
that we didn't gloss over that, because it would be,
Right.
it would not be proper board structure, because we're not, we are a board by committee, and the committee is making progress, and they're making good progress. And this kind of conversation is appropriate board conversation and where it needs to happen. Okay?
Okay, good. Okay, do we need a motion for K2? I think we do, right? Or what's the motion for off K? That's consent, okay. K2 is second reading. And any questions or comments on any of the policies in K2?
They're bylaws.
Bylaws, sorry. Just one small comment. I don't know if it really matters, but the titles of the bylaws and the titles in the documents don't always match the title in the attachment. I guess that's okay, right? The attachments are just called what they're called. But it might be a Freudian slip. But resignation and removal of the president in 9114. It's actually about resignation and removal of everybody. But, I don't know where that came from. Yeah.
Actually, it's renamed though.
Yeah.
Mine doesn't say that.
Yeah.
Mine doesn't say that either.
Oh, so this just for me.
Just yours.
Yeah. It's a secret message.
Oh, it says it. It does
Yeah.
say it. It
Yeah.
does say it in the list.
Yeah.
In the list.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
None of the rest of us noticed that.
Yeah, I'm going to abstain on that one. Yeah.
That's very fun.
Oh.
Duties of the president.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
But
okay.
but 9114 is
yeah. That's
is
that. Don't worry about that.
resignation and removal of any board member. That's what I mean. Okay.
All right.
Anyway, not a big deal. So, any other questions or comments? None. Meanwhile, the snow is falling outside. So now we're on to item L, personnel, and this is an action item. Can I have a motion for item L1? Thanks, Jess, and second, Beth. Any questions or comments from the board? And if there aren't any, I think Lou or Annie, do you have something to say on?
Yeah, we do. We have a retirement on the board tonight. Tim McReynolds, the grants program specialist at Valley Road, is retiring after 17 and a half years, and Annie's going to talk a little bit about Kim.
So Kim McReynolds is retiring after 17 and a half years, is our grant writer and program specialist. She graduated from the University of Michigan with a degree in education, and she has been overseeing for us all of our state and federal entitlement grants through the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So that's Title I, II, III, IV. In addition to that, she has been able to find funding for us over these 17 years for so many programs that have positively impacted our students' learning, and specifically for students with some academic need. We are very grateful for some very specific thing that she has done, and I know that she's also particularly proud of certain things, and I wanted to highlight 4 of them. Kim was instrumental in helping us to implement our preschool program, which started in 2004, and she has brought in through preschool aid about $49,500 a year for the last 14 years to help support that program. And that, along with the district commitment to our preschool program, it's been growing and flourishing. She also had a role in our dual immersion program rollout, looking at Title II funds to see how she could help provide planning time and resources for teachers to get that program up and going. She's especially happy to have been part of the K-12 summer school program, which we've been running for several years. Much of that is grant funded and targeted to serve students in need of academic support. She's also was very instrumental in targeting Title I monies for our individual schools' after-school programs, and that funding has allowed our schools to sort of own those programs and develop after-school programs that need to meet the needs of students in each of those buildings. So Kim will be sorely missed for her knowledge and understanding of the grant world, for her ability to work successfully with a variety of stakeholders, and for her skill at bringing people across the district and across the community together at the right time and for the right purpose. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to say thank you to Kim for her 17 and a half years of dedication to Princeton, and we wish her well in her retirement.
Thank you, Annie.
Thank you, Annie. Okay, and so this is a actual vote, and it's roll call. So we.
Patrick Sullivan.
Yes.
Betsy Baglio.
Yes.
Beth Barron.
Yes.
Debbie Braunfeld.
Yes.
Jessica Deutsch.
Yes.
Deutsch. Sorry.
Yes.
Bill Hare.
Yes.
Daphne Kendall. Yes. Evelyn Spahn.
Yes.
Greg Stankiewicz.
Yes.
And Michelle Tuck-Ponder. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so that's on to item M. I think we can just do one motion for M1, 2, and 3. So can I have a motion?
No.
Oh, we have to do M1 separate?
No, we do all M1, 2, and 3, N 1, 2, and 3. So if you just want to mention what they are, and then there's 2 action items, the budget and then the acquisition of land. So
Okay.
everything else is consent.
everything else is consent. So we're just going to do that in one motion. All right, fair enough. So can we have a motion for M, N, and O? Debbie, and a second. Beth.
Just a minute, please. Wait, it's Debbie. Where'd Debbie go? Debbie. And I'm sorry, who's second?
Beth. Okay, and now any questions or comments on any M items? And those are pretty non-controversial. Anything on item N? No questions there. How about on O? I mean, we've already talked about the tentative budget a few times. Is there anything that we want to say about that?
Well, that's not on the consent. That's an action item.
Okay.
What's it, N3?
N3, okay.
What about it?
Do you have a question? Or?
I don't know what it is.
Oh, okay.
It's a special education settlement.
For an individual?
District placement.
Yes.
Out of a district placement.
All right.
It's confidential detail.
I figured that.
Okay. So we're going to skip item 01
And 06.
and 06. So anything other than those items? If not, then shall we circle back to 01?
Everyone has voted on the consent except for the president.
Oh, sorry. Just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, it's
I
passed.
voted yes, just so you know.
Now as
01, the tentative budget. Can we have a motion for 01? Greg, and a second, Debbie?
So what do you want to talk about?
Would you like to set it up? I think, you know.
Yes, so there are attachments. This is the tentative budget. So we have, I've included as an attachment, I'm going to pull them up. Well, there's a large resolution that applies to this, which is a requirement. So we have the tentative budget adoption, which outlines total expenditures, general fund special revenues, which are our grants, debt service, and then a total, which will bringing the total budget proposed to $98,055,853. Taxes to be raised to support that. We don't raise taxes for special revenues. Out of the 90 million of general fund, 76 or 246 of general levy taxes will be raised. For debt service, 5.1 million for a total of 81,415,395. We are using the banked. So another part of the resolution, we have to identify that we're using the banked adjustment waiver of 620,032. That's included in those numbers, and a tentative general levy, which I mentioned, is 76 million, and then we have a tentative capital reserve withdrawal. What we did with this is there were to reduce the budget, we took funds out of maintenance. We took a lot of funds out of maintenance projects, but we also took out a partial roof project, and took that and put it into capital reserve, which are funds we already have, so it doesn't impact the tax levy, but we can still get the roof repaired. There's a little bit of roof that needs to be repaired at the high school and at some at JW. It's more like a maintenance roof repair. That's why it's only $100,000. And then on the attachments, so the first attachment is the general fund expenses, and it's the by category. It's by the category that we follow internally. It's not the DOE, the way it's laid out. So when next month, when we put the general budget up under the DOA software, it'll be a little bit different because the accounts are sorted differently. But we have the central office grouping, the school grouping, other departments, the non-discretionary, which is just the categories of none of the others above, and then salaries. And then the totals. I can answer any questions on that.
I have one question. Under other district-wide, under non-discretionary.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
There's multiple things in there. There's what we could refer to as accumulated leave. So there's funding in there for when people they go on leave and we have to pay for the replacement, so that it's funded there. Or if there's degree changes, it's funded there.
Okay.
Retirements are funded, like retirement payouts are funded there. It's budgeted there, but then when it gets expended, it has to actually go to the line that it's paid from, that the person's salary comes from the category. But we don't budget in those lines because we don't know at the time. Additionally, there is tuition per association agreements. There's Social Security payment that's $1.2 million. There's PERS payment $1.3 million. What else did I mention today?
$1.2 million and $1.3 million. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah,
that
that's
was
most about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stephanie, can I ask you a question about the charter school tuition increase?
Yes. Yes.
Why did it go up?
Because that is the second half of the charter school expansion. So last year, they took on 54 kids, so it was 800 and
this is
something.
This is half.
This is the other.
The other 22.
This is the additional kids, the other 22 kids.
And
So
it's also possible that if you call in your students going to the charter school from a private school, in that first year, the district is not charged for
Got it.
those students, but in
Mhm.
the second year, the district is.
That's probably what that.
Yeah.
So-
So overall,
go ahead.
the increase over the 2 years was 1,302,000
For how many? For 76.
So I just
for
wanted
76 kids.
So I just wanted to say, I've been, I don't believe in litigation, and both the district and the charter school have probably spent a lot of money on lawyers. And I've always personally pushed for us to settle because in the end, that's what always happens. And so in October, I think there was a ruling against us, and well, a ruling didn't go our way in the Open Public Meeting Act lawsuit. And after that, we had some decisions to make as a board, and one of them is whether or not to continue the litigation. We have two lawsuits going on right now. One is an appeal of the OPMA case, and one is an appeal of the commissioner's decision. And so as a board member, when we were going through the charter school expansion issues, and word got out that I was pushing to come to a settlement, people, I actually got a phone call and someone said, "You better stop or you're going to get run out of town." And I said, "Well, I'm a board member and my first duty is a fiduciary duty to the district." And I very strongly believe that. So now we have two appeals pending. We would like very much to settle these lawsuits. But again, as a fiduciary of the district, there's really no benefit to the district to settle these lawsuits at this point, absent some concession from the charter school. And we were supposed to have mediation in our case tomorrow with the charter school, but it was canceled because of the weather. But even so, why do we have to get lawyers in a room to come to an agreement about that's in the best interest of the Princeton taxpayers and our students without spending the Princeton taxpayers' money? So I would just like to extend an olive branch to the charter school. You see our budget; it is very tight. That's a word we're using a lot tonight. In this budget, there's no new staff, although we really do need some additional staff, especially a college counselor to work with our underserved kids at the high school, and also 2 psychology interns, which we had to take out of the budget. Also in this budget is a reduction of aides. It's probably 10 of them. So we're making a lot of sacrifices. And again, there's no new staff in this budget. So I would, again, like to extend an olive branch and ask the charter school for us to come to a resolution so that the district has a financial incentive to drop the lawsuits and we can all move on from this. Absent some kind of concession, we're not going, I mean, at least speaking for myself, I wouldn't be able to agree to drop the lawsuits because it's not in the best interest of the district. So I just wanted to put that out there. It's a very tight budget. I've always respected the charter school, the education they provide their children, and I respect their right to be there. But you know, we definitely do serve a different population of children, and an acknowledgement of these restraints and constraints would be appreciated, and I think in the best interests of all of Princeton.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. I'd just like to circle back. This is a nice document at a high level to understand, you know, what we're not doing. To your point about the you know, the austerity of this budget. So if you look at the sort of big groupings that you've done here, Stephanie. So the central office is up $349,000. Most of that is student services, which is in effect special education costs that we have to provide. It's not something that's negotiable or otherwise. If you look at the sort of operating budgets of the schools, it's only one school that's up, you know, less than 1%, $24,000. So it's very, very small in terms of what the schools have to do just the ordinary things that they do.
For more kids.
For rising enrollments. If you look at the departments, you know, this is talking about the athletics and the facilities and the maintenance and the technology. It's down $30,000 on rising enrollments. And then you get to this non-discretionary part, which, you know, by its nature, we don't have control over. But there's a very large item there, $475,000 for charter school. And, you know, I agree, Daphne, with a lot of what you said. Some of I don't. You know that I am a strong supporter in public education. I'm a product of public education, and I think that that's where
I am too.
I know you are. I know you are. But $886,000 for non-discretionary, of which more than half is the charter school. Let's move on. $2.3 million in increases. These are contractual obligations of our labor negotiations. We have very fair labor contracts that have been very highly negotiated over the years. We're working on or have renewed all of them at a very fair rate, and I think we respect all of the unions and what they've done to come to the table and put these long-term arrangements together. So there's nothing there that's new, exciting, outrageous, and sometimes you see things in the press about, you know, again, you talk about people not being fiscally irresponsible or whatever. We know what it's like that it's important to keep a middle class in this town, but you look at this budget, what is there? What, you know, Bill and your finance committee, you've been going through these things and looking for every penny. What is there? It's just not, there's just not that much there that's new, exciting, different on rising enrollment. So I commend you, Stephanie, and all this board. I'm working really hard to keep things under control. And it is under control, I think. It's a very sound, if anything, I'd like to be talking about things that we can do more for our kids. And we're talking about cutting all the time. And, you know, we are very aware of the taxpayers, but we're also aware that we have an obligation to provide a public education to the public. It's, in this political environment, that's under attack everywhere in this country. And I just like to say again, what a phenomenal job you and this board is doing to make that happen. So let's remember the big picture, that we're doing the right thing.
Pat, can I just also add that we have a whole page of programs that and benefits that have been cut to get us down to the point we are, and I want to acknowledge that. It's a full page that we've worked very hard and to support, you know, the really good thinking that went into that. I also just wanted to, I'd like to say this not out of malice or anger, but I would like to acknowledge the fact that two of our biggest cost drivers, one is the increase in enrollment. And I think as a community, we want to make sure that every child who walks through those doors gets the services that they need. But the second big increase that we see is from the charter school. And the reason I want to point that out is that some of our friends at the charter school 2 years ago, when they were talking about this, said that having an expansion would help us from a fiscal point of view. And unfortunately, and I really say unfortunately, that's not the situation that we see. I think there are ways of bringing us all together, and they're very different paths. The governor just announced, I think, 2 weeks ago, that he would like to review the charter school law here in the state of New Jersey, and is going to put a commission together. He's not, and he made very clear, he's not against charter schools, but he thinks that the charter school law is broken. I don't want to talk very much about details in our experience, except to point out the fact that this experience has torn our community apart. And I think one of the reasons that I support the governor's stance and looking to see what we can do that helps both charters and districts is the fact that we went through such a difficult time. And I'd like to commend the entire board for that experience, and just say that I totally agree with you, Daphne, that there's a fiduciary responsibility, and I think we need to maintain everything possible to make sure that we maintain that as well.
Thanks. Okay.
Pat, can I just say,
go ahead, Beth.
you know, as a new member on the board, I think the three of us that just joined, there's a big learning curve, and we've spent a lot of time with the numbers, and I know I've spent hours looking at this and trying to understand it. And, you know, the big picture is that discretionary, the discretionary portion of the budget is it's 15%. I mean, you know, people, salaries are 57% of this budget. We can't do anything about that, 57%. And the non-discretionary stuff is another 27%. So you end up 85% of this budget is pretty much, you know, already spoken for when you start. And we've gone through all of that and looked at that. And then you've got a discretionary 15%. And I also was kind of trying to understand the levies and make sure I understand every year, you know, we're going up 2%. Well, why are we even going up 2%? What would a 2% increase look like? That would look like $1,730,233 worth of cuts to people, to our staff and our programs, and our children would feel that directly. So I am not happy that we have to go to the public and say that we are increasing the levy. And I understand, and we just went through a very long election where we spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people all around this town. And I feel what they're going through, and I'm really uncomfortable that we have to do this, but we do have a fiduciary duty, and we do have a duty to the 4,000 children that are now in our public schools. And unfortunately, you know, these people here are doing a lot of really good work, and I appreciate the time that you've taken to answer all of my, you know, annoying and repeated questions. But we've been up and down with this, and I must say that this is really an extraordinarily difficult task. And I think that, you know, the fact that we're doing a 4.3% increase in the levy, I mean, I don't see any other way around it. And I commend you for all the cuts you've made. And I am concerned that we don't have any room for new staff this year. And I don't understand how we move forward and continue to provide the excellence that our community expects. It's going to be a big challenge. So that's my perspective as kind of a new person on this board.
Well, thanks. I don't know if oh, do you
I
just
just was wondering if Stephanie could highlight, because you just mentioned the 4.3% increase in the levy, while it's actually a 3.63% increase, because you're right, but we added $500,000 from the payment from.
Yes,
from
the
2001.
net tax increase is 3.625, which is an increase on the average assessed home of $159.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay, but.
But do you want to explain how we got to that?
So there's a document, I mean, how I got to the tax levy? There was a, we offset that increase of the 4% through the debt service payment. We had a settlement that we had gained money to pay back the district for some issues that occurred on the 2001 referendum projects. Took a bunch of years. And that money came in, and we are now putting it in to pay down the debt service.
Which lowers the overall.
Which lowered the overall
tax
taxes.
impact.
Yeah. So that's what we've
No,
done.
you were right. It was at 4%. I just wanted
Was
to
it
highlight
yeah.
that we were able to pay down the debt service. Because we were looking for any way to lower the tax impact on the community, and found that one strategy to be able to do that.
The other two attachments. One is, I think Greg mentioned, the list of the cuts that were made. Back on March 6th, when we had our budget workshop, we had $1.3 million of a gap between revenues and expenses. And then there's a listing where we removed $900,000 in different different ways. They're all listed there. That left us with a $425,000 short. Then we got state aid, and we thought, oh, that's great. Then we got a little bit more money, until I had estimated the charter school too low. So part of that increase, so I had to add money to that line, and then I had to add some money for some miscellaneous changes, which then was 624. We were able to cover the 624 by the 524 that we got from the state aid and the $100,000 that we got from the Advanced Institute.
Institute for Advanced Study. Yep.
So that's what brings us to an equal budget. The budget, I can't say it enough that the non-discretionaries are so tight. They're actually making me a little bit nervous this time. I'm usually not as concerned about how tightly they're budgeted than I am this year. You'll see some of those areas weren't even, like utilities, we didn't even increase those. Health benefits is only,
just gonna go off.
if they do, you won't be able to call me because the phone service won't work either. So it's pretty tight in all those other areas. Then the last attached page is the tax impact page. So what I wanted to show here is that currently our 17-18 tax levy was $73 million. A 2% increase on that would be $1.4 million. So a total of $74 million. But when we got our budget documents, our first budget documents, the state had, they have a whole calculation, and they acknowledge and recognize enrollments.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they take it away from you when they go down, but they give it to you when they go up. So the state started us off at 3.52% tax levy on a weighted average of the enrollment,
Right.
not straight out, but they give you a portion of the of credit for the enrollment. So we started off per the direction of the recommendation of the state, not the direction, recommendation of the state to be at $75.6 million. We had banked cap, fortunately, which we applied, bringing our general levy to $76 million. I demonstrated the difference of what the tax levy would have been at 2% versus our higher than 2%. And then I also showed in the middle of there what Beth had mentioned, that if we budgeted at 2%, we would be required today to cut $1.7 million out of the budget.
More than we've already cut.
More additional, yeah, today.
Right.
We have a flat budget, I mean, a balanced budget today, 1.7 million. There is nowhere but staffing and programs that can be cut from this budget at this point.
Right. Staffing is 70% of our budget between
Yeah.
salaries and health benefits.
And I note that too in the middle of the page, salary and benefits, 69.5, non-discretionary, 27, leaving, those two categories are 96.9% of our budget.
Well, I'm put another way, I just did some quick math. If a 2% increase versus what you have here would be, I think you have a $161 increase, is that right?
159.
159. So a 2% would be a $96 increase. So, you know, in percents, it sounds like it's a really big difference, but you're talking about $50, right? And so we have to keep this in perspective. And like, it's the one thing that, again, like when my family moved here many years ago now, you know, I'll tell you, we didn't come for the nightlife. It was, you know, we moved from New York City. we came for the schools, and you know, we wanted there to be good. We could have moved anywhere, you know, and we moved here because we wanted very good schools, and we got that. And you know, part of what we got, we were standing on the shoulders of people who had come before us and built these wonderful buildings. Part of it was the teachers and how excellent they are, and part of it is the neighbors and how and all the people in town how much respect they have for public education. All those things come together. We need to remember the big picture, right? That, you know, we agonize over every tenth of a percentage point, but really the difference between 2% and what we're passing tonight is $60, and it's worth it. You know, if we didn't do that, you know, I think the next young people like me coming along might not decide to come here in the first place. This is what this town is about, and so we do need to keep that in perspective. And so again, I commend everyone for such a nice job that they did putting all this together, and especially you, Stephanie, so thank you. I think so, unless anyone else has any other questions or comments. All right.
This is online voting. It's not a roll call.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, wait, I gotta close online.
Okay, and now one more, if we're done.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, the next one is acquisition of property. Yay.
And this was in addition to the agenda. Whoops.
It's there, yeah.
Here it is.
Do we need a first and a second?
A first, Betsy, and a second. Bill?
So just for clarity, this is part of the this is a cost worked into the referendum.
That's correct.
But we are authorizing you to execute the agreement. Yeah.
Previously, the board gave Steve and I the authorization to research for and make offers on properties, which we've done. And so we got to a point where we found the property. We were able to make an agreement with the owner. So now the next step is we have to go into a option agreement. We signed a offer page, and so we've in agreement. Now this is the option agreement. The reason why it's an option is because it's basically a contingent sale. So we can't buy it until it goes out to public vote and the community says, yes, we want you to buy that land. So this just finalizes that piece for the owner to feel confident that we're going to pursue the best we can and do our due diligence along the way. And then they're aware that come November 2nd, they would know whether we can move forward.
So this would obligate us to, indeed, if the referendum passed, to purchase this property?
Correct.
Okay.
If the referendum doesn't pass, is there any is there any option that we would owe?
There's a possibility that we could owe some carrying costs for holding the property. It's in there. It's a maximum of.
Oh, $25,000?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Voting is open. Okay, everybody's in. And there we go.
All right. Well, thank you again, Stephanie. I know this was, I think, your fourth property that you
Yeah.
were bidding on. There's a lot of work to get one property under options. So again, yeah, not to mention you looked at. So thanks for all your work there.
Thank you.
It's exciting. All right, so that brings us to item P, which is our consent vote on all the other items that we didn't vote on up to now. So can I have a motion?
No, we did. We voted on that.
Oh, did the consent? You're right. We did that before. So now we're on to our final public comment session. If there are any public comments, Dr. Krell, you got the stamina for this?
He's slipping into it.
Yeah.
By the way, you can take the day off tomorrow if you want.
Thank you. Very generous. Bob Carroll, Princeton High School. First, just want to acknowledge Kim McReynolds has been a great help to me in writing grants along the years. I really wish you luck trying to replace her because she has been tremendously helpful to me in writing grants, particularly for me to attend meetings at no cost to the district. So that's been tremendous, and I wish her all the best. I have a couple of questions about the budget, Stephanie. Or comments. First of all, the line item about the health benefits going up less than 1% is quite impressive in today's day and age. I just wanted to compliment you. I don't know how you did that, but well done. And then...
You may not want to know. The root doctor.
On the non-discretionary charter school, next to the number, there's 422. Is that the number of students? Is that what that is?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, because I saw the enrollment numbers above. That's why I thought it was the same thing. And then on the back of that page, when you look at the faculty PREA line, that's a almost $1.5 million increase, which works out to be almost 5%. Now, I know that's a lot more than what we negotiated, and since we didn't add any new staff, how does that work out?
That
Is that current staff?
it's.
That we have that more budgeted this time.
I mean, if
No,
we're
it's
getting more money, I'm all good with
yeah,
that.
unfortunately, no, that's not the case. I have a little disclaimer on another sheet that says did I have it on yours?
Yes, it's recently added.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that whole category of salaries has percents of increases are not a reflection of the group's individual increases.
I trust me.
You know that, right?
I'm well aware of that.
Yeah.
I still
But
want to
there's
understand if we
different
settled for 2 point whatever it was.
There's different reasons for. One is, if you remember when I said that we budget for retirements and things like that in that one category, well, when we pay them out, they have to go into the lines of where the people are paid out. So there's that there. There's degree changes that are reflected in there.
Okay.
There's what? EPSs are
EPS
there.
is a separate line.
No, EPS is a separate line, yeah, sorry. It's just a whole conglomerate of different things.
Okay.
You'd have to look at each of the different.
And is it possible that there are some teachers who were added during the course of the year as
Oh,
a result
absolutely.
of rising
there were,
enrollment? So
yeah.
we're adding no new staff in anticipation of for next year, but that doesn't mean that there weren't some staff that were added during the course of this year as enrollments grew and needs.
So
And
that
then
means
there's salaries.
So that means the budgeted line may not be the actual
Accurate.
expenditure line.
Correct.
Okay. And that number that you're projecting for 2018-19 already includes the announced retirements, whatever few there have been?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no other comments, and if we have any other closing comments or discussion from the board?
Meet the board April 12th,
Okay.
3 o'clock, Princeton High School.
Stephanie, I'm just wondering, since I think Kip had asked the question, but I'm not sure who's watching at this hour. The question about why we can't rent facilities for the administration to be in. Yeah, I think in light of looking at the referendum, in light of the budget, this would be it's an important question to answer.
So if you look at the expense page that I showed you, there is one line that's new this year, which is called lease trailers. It says admin space because the trailers were for were actually faculty. That's $50,000 that I had to add to the budget for 18-19. It was under capital reserve the first year. When we lease the trailers, when we lease an office, when we lease a property, when we lease anything, it has to come out of the operating expense. So therefore, for the time that we have the trailers, I can't decrease that amount because we're committed to that. So it's another non-discretionary expense.
The kind of space we're actually we would need for the administration, we would be talking well over $1 million, probably $2 million a year. And we don't have that in our operating budget. Right. So the fiscally responsible thing was to buy an inexpensive piece of land for the buses and for facilities, and then to use our own school properties to create space for the administration, which does place us centrally among teachers and students where I think we can have the biggest impact.
And the fact that it's a building or a space, it's going to last for 30 years, so it makes sense that you can borrow it over the time versus trying to get it into your operating budget.
Okay, any other comments before we adjourn? If not, can we have a motion this is T1 to adjourn? And there we are, Daphne, and second, Greg. So, and all in favor? Is this a vote? Thank you, everyone, for all your terrific work and for staying late to get this all done. Really exciting. Thank you.
It's fine now.
What?
Weather's okay.